Hello, everyone, and welcome to RHAP's coverage of Global Survivor, doing a little off-season Global Survivor content where, we're getting into US Survivor 47 soon, but Global Survivor, we're sorely missing some of those international seasons, and I thought, let's get into some international Survivor content with a theme that I enjoy so much that I've podcasted about it now in a trilogy this very, I would say summer, but winter for me in the last few months. I'm so excited to get back into it. Clearly, I'm obsessed with this, but I've got such a great panel to talk about the defining moments of international Survivor seasons, which we will get into. First, let me bring in my Summer Survivor co-host, the king of the preseason, the king of the off-season. Leave some seasons for the rest of us, but it is the great Mike Bloom, the blank to my blank, I should say.
There we go. We got to get back into our international Survivor flow. Excited to be here, Shannon. Yeah, my favorite part of every trilogy is when like the first two parts are directly back to back, then the third one just goes to a completely different country or other part of the globe that like a third of its audience might understand, but the rest are just kind of being like whatever. But the third that do, love it. As do we all as international Survivor fans.
Yeah, that's what I thought about this as a podcast idea. I thought some people really liked, going through all the defining moments, which you did in two back-to-back, not back-to-back, but two podcasts, all the US Survivor seasons. If you haven't checked that out in Summer of Survivor, how dare you, go do that. But then I thought, and then some of the people who appreciated that will appreciate this, and that is good podcasting. So we brought in a great guest who was with us on one of those podcasts, on the sequel of US Survivor seasons, who's also seen most of these international Survivor seasons. It just made sense. It is the great Peridiam. Peridiam, thank you for being here.
I would like to say I'm the guest that is being brought on that sucks. I'm not the good one. I'm not Rob Sesternino. I am the one for part two, who was shoehorned in at the last second and had to do the casting change. And you're like, why does that guy look different and have a different voice? I'm super happy to be here. I've never actually shared much of my thoughts on international Survivor.
Yeah.
I spent 7 years talking about US Survivor, and there is so much else to talk about out in the world, but my channel just doesn't find time to do it, and that's sort of my fault. But I'm happy to be here.
Isn't that all you?
Sort of. Look, if the money was there and the views were there, it would be a different story.
Well, hopefully the views are here.
It's all about the bottom line. Well, Peridiam also has this he has this rare window where in covering Survivor and Big Brother, you get basically a month between the US and the Big Brother, US Survivor and Big Brother seasons, and then by the time the other US season finishes, it's the holidays, so you can always squeeze it in when AU tries to do it for that 4-week period.
I made a video because I actually visited New Zealand 6 years ago and hung out with one of the winners of the seasons. Guess which one? There's only two. And it was in 2018, so right after the last season aired. And it was amazing. And I sat down, I watched the New Zealand seasons, and then I decided, let's make a video on it. I made it solely on New Zealand Survivor, 2 seasons, why you should watch it. And then I think a year or two ago, I was like, I want to do this for Australian Survivor. And I think it was announced that it was going on CBS, Paramount Plus or All Access or whatever.
For a scope.
So I was so amped up. I was like, God, this is it. You got to. So I put it on everyone's radar on my channel. I was like, here's why you should watch Australian Survivor. I made that video. And then it came off. They took it off. I think a week later.
Yeah,
why?
No, you don't remember this? And the same thing happened with South Africa.
Oh, they took it off Paramount Plus. I thought they meant they took off your video.
No, my video is still there, but I had to write a message and be like, okay, so actually you can't watch it, unless you do alternative.
That sucked, but people can.
And it was unfortunate because I'm like, this is so good, you guys will love it, and I think a lot of people do still love it. And if you want to go out of your way to find this stuff, Australian Survivor is gonna be your bread and butter if you love US Survivor. Yeah, it's just more of it. It's and every season is 2 seasons worth of content, so you're getting instead of 9, you get 18 seasons kind of. It's really good. And that's how I kind of view Australian Survivor. It's basically it's enough energy where I have to be okay, do I want to do 2 seasons now back to back? Because it's pre-merge and post-merge. It's a totally different
5.
season.
It really feels a lot. Yeah.
So I made that. I haven't gotten around to doing it for South Africa. To be fair, I haven't watched all of South Africa, which is going to play into our conversation in just a moment. But I'm really happy to sit here and just sort of share my thoughts on all this because there's a lot going on. And I'm going to have to jog my memory a bit because it has been a while.
Yeah, I had to jog my memory for some of it, delved into the Wikipedia files and my notes for some. It did remind me that there are some really editorialized Wikipedia articles that I knew and remembered as what? There's one character we can talk about in the Wikipedia articles. They call it someone went through and just completely defamed her throughout that entire Wikipedia article, and I only remembered when I saw them Wikipedia call her arrogant, and I was like, oh yeah, they did this.
Oh, I thought you meant like the official capital W Wikipedia. You're talking about the Survivor Wiki?
No, the real wiki in the Survivor Champions, every single time it mentions Marion,
Wow,
it's like
wiki
she
drama.
arrogantly did this. I remember that. I remember like 2 years ago being like, do you know about this? And now I remember. But no, I feel like Peridiam, you're not we have Rob at home, Rob. We're glad to have you here. We're glad. It's actually special.
We have Peridiam at home with Rob.
Exactly. And if Rob is watching this, which he's probably not, that's how I feel.
Right.
So this is gonna be great. And Australian Survivor is like hot right now. You know, coming off 2 incredible back-to-back seasons with some exciting stuff. Some rumors maybe of a global season. So this is a good time to be talking about International Survivor and hopefully bringing US viewers into the global sphere. Hopefully they're catching up and watching this
exactly.
podcast.
Listen, if you're going out to film this, check this out so you could be like, yes, so-and-so, I remember on your season when this defining moment happened. We're trying to seed some common ground for you in these future international conversations.
100%. And look, if you are excited about the global season, possibly a lot of the people we mentioned here might be playing again all together, which is super exciting. So even better to make the world a bit smaller, keep doing all of this content around International Survivor. So today what we're going to do, for the people who didn't watch the US iterations of this, please do. But basically I made a spreadsheet of what is the defining moment. And we went back and forth on what is defining, not necessarily the best moment, not necessarily the most memorable moment. It could be that. The way I described it in the first podcast that we did was, firstly, if you think about like Friends titling, the one with blank, as an example, Pearl Island, the one with the dead grandma lie. You want to think about it. It could be the best moment. It might be the most memorable moment, but it also has to kind of speak to the theme, the feel, the tone of the season. It might speak to the winner's journey. It might speak to a very notable loser's losing journey. If that's like, as example, like Russell, losing over and over again. Maybe even here we'll talk about it. It might speak to that losing journey instead, but it's got to like really define the essence of the season in a way that is memorable and captures that. And it's really satisfying when you get it. And we're going to go back and forth on this. So the seasons we're going to do, 17 seasons that I think we could realistically expect our listeners to have seen, all of the seasons covered on RHAP in the time we've covered modern international seasons. That is SA5 Champions through 9 Return of the Outcast. We went back during COVID, covered SA5, even though it's a slightly older season.
10 years old this year.
I know, which is crazy. I was just listening to the 47 content, and Andy was saying, he's been watching for 10 years. And I was like, oh, what was that, like All Stars? And he was like, and then I realized that was Cagayan. And I was like, God, I'm old.
No, All Stars is 20 years.
Don't even do that. So, yeah, so we're going to do SA5 through 9. We're going to do New Zealand 1 and 2. Don't really remember New Zealand 1 well. We'll talk about it, but that was covered by Nick.
Maybe the winner was one of the ones that Peridiam
maybe that's one of the Peridiam. UK, which was last year, and then all 9 modern Australian seasons. That's what we're doing. Anything, Mike, before we get into it?
No, I think let's just jump into it. I mean, that being said, we are going to spoil the results of these seasons and significant events. There is a fair chance, including some people on this panel, that you will not have watched everything. This is unfortunately a little bit of buyer beware. I think there's only so much kind of pussyfooting we can do around certain things that happen in the season, especially when we're talking about some of the most important moments from it. So just like a blanket mea culpa, if people do end up getting spoiled from this, maybe in the show notes we can have like timestamps of seasons or something so that people can.
That sounds like a lot. Who's
go
doing
to
that? Me.
You answered your own question, but if people,
gosh, okay, thank you.
But like if you haven't watched South Africa
franchises,
if people haven't watched South Africa, for instance, you could skip to number in the time code to go check out the Australian seasons as an example.
I feel like it's going to be very difficult to talk about like the defining moments without referencing, some of the big. Yeah, that
would be a fun exercise. Remember when that person did that thing? Yes. Oh my God, it was so epic.
We'll just use other nondescript, other like person A, person B, so nobody gets spoiled. Because we know that there's people out there who don't want to get spoiled. So we'll say, okay, remember that time that we can do make up names. Let's just make up. Actually, to be fair, you guys can be making up names for this first one we're gonna be talking about with SA Champions. Honestly,
you have to guess what's fake.
I'm just gonna go, okay, sounds good to me.
Honestly, some of it will probably sound a bit fake in some of the things that we talk about. So Okay, we'll get into it. Yes, we're going to go in order. We're not doing the big go balls because it's confusing enough to jump around franchises, and we're trying to keep on track with everyone. We're starting with Survivor South Africa. We're going to start with Survivor South Africa champions. And Peridiam, to explain this season, it was pirate themed. There were two
Pearl Islands
sports star champions who were just there.
Yeah, they were what people thought the original Island of the Idols twist is, which is that these two guys who did not know Survivor at all were brought in to be captains of their tribes. They couldn't be voted out, but they were sort of like the coaches of their respective tribes. And then when the post-merge happened, they, ironically enough, played a bigger part in the game where they didn't live with the tribes anymore, but every episode they would do sort of like a coach's challenge where they would compete against each other. And then the winner got to nullify one vote against a person of their choice in that episode's tribal council.
Yeah, like a one vote idol. And it was funny. Like for me, when I think about the one with, for me, Champions is the one with Genie Mark Fish. But I think that might be specific to me and you, Mike.
Yeah, that's like the biggest meme that came out of our COVID idol coverage. So I have a couple here. And I think one is probably the most memorable one. And I think one more so maybe represents the season as a whole. But they do both involve the aforementioned woman that you're talking about in the form of Marianne. Because I think if you're talking about the one with, another interesting wrinkle, and I don't know if it was part of the pirate theme or not, but usually in the Survivor rules, you cannot take other people's advantages or idols. That is their personal property unless they give it away. Except in Survivor South Africa Champions. And a moment that I think has unfortunately lived down in Marianne's history when it comes to the way people regard her, even 2 seasons after the fact, is that at the swap, one person gets swapped over and basically gets handed her tribe's idol to save her. And basically, Marianne helps lead her away from the camp while her alliance goes through her bag and steals the idol.
Yeah. That's the top one that I had as well. I also don't know why I two named you earlier, Mike Bloom, but I'm going to be doing that. Yeah, I feel like it's very hard because I do think Shane and Marianne should be the defining moment. I mean, they go on to define the returning season in many ways as well. Their relationship is so pivotal. And I had, the moment where Jenna swaps over and the other tribe get the idol to her, and then it's stolen from her bag. It was seen as so villainous. And it was definitely the image that I had in my mind. But it's just unfortunate because Graham is such a good winner. And I do think it's unfair to him to kind of erase him from that winning story, even though I do feel like there's this Shane and Marianne element, and then there is a Graham element. So kind of the other options that I had were, if you wanted something really Graham specific, you could have him creating the Rugrats to flip on Zavion's alliance in the first vote. It really kind of set the tone.
Right. That would be one of the earliest defining moments, is the first vote as a tribe that happened in episode 2.
Well, we'll talk about it because I think there's another winner's moment in the first week in these seasons we'll talk about that does define that winning game. Graham's really dominance throughout. He's a really good winner. And yeah, it was a big flip already. It really started the season in a fun way. I didn't know what to expect about Champions. When that happened, I was like, oh, this is so fun. Why have I not watched this earlier? So that's something I think about. If we're thinking about Shane and Marianne, you can obviously, huge spoiler alert, but Shane going home with 2 idols is a big moment. Marianne using Shane's idol, he uses it on her. She flips it back. She uses on him. She idols herself out of the game at the merge.
That was my second choice because Graham was probably the most in danger that he ever was in that game, because that was, Shane and Marianne's alliance trying to bring their numbers together to take him down. And so I think, to your point, if you're looking for something that does highlight the winner, that is a good one, because then Graham on the other side is able to help rally enough votes in that odd, 4-3 to 3-1 vote that leads to that tiebreaker that leads Marianne, to your point, to use the idol that Shane gave her on Shane and then idols herself out in the process.
Yeah, the reason I'd go with that is because it's a pivotal merge vote. Graham winning that, I think, defines his winning journey and the way that trajectory is going to go.
You can also say
Shane losing that defines them.
Yeah, David gets confirmed as the turncoat, the Penner turncoat, where he flips on his original tribe and then he flips on his swap tribe.
Yeah, I was thinking David waving his underwear at Shona's maybe one there for me. A couple of just to be spoiler central. Sivu, who I love so much, idling out. Zavion is a big one. The fact that it's a plurality vote final tribal council, I'm obsessed with, in ways that to me defines some of the complexity and the chaos of the season and the winning game. But yeah, I think that even within this, as much as that merge moment does kind of have all three of these main characters, the reason I go for Shane and Marion stealing the idol is I just feel like it also kind of sums up this big twist of being able to steal idols, the pirate theme, and their villainous nature. And it is the only one I had in my like top, what am I saying here, column in this Excel spreadsheet, and you had it too. So I think we should probably go with that. But there's so many good moments in the season. Peridiam, you should watch the season. It's
go
really
check
fun,
it out,
now
people.
that it's all fully spoiled for you.
And now that it's a decade old.
Yeah.
Out of context, I'm like, wow, that sounds really kind of wild.
It is. It's such a good season. Honestly, like what it is like if someone were to just edit the season down, as we've often said, into like a fan like edited version of it and cut out a lot of like the champion stuff, like it's the kind of thing where
there was an additional twist. There was an additional twist where the reward challenge, they often brought in other sports stars for the episode to be like, oh, and you're also winning the use of this person in the immunity challenge.
Yeah, like they could cut out 10 to 15 minutes probably per episode, and then it would be like a phenomenal season. I still think it's a great season. Like you just have to like get through some of that, and it's so worthwhile. The reason I was also thinking, because if you want to work in the champions, who technically should be worked in, but maybe having a moment that's not as involved with them does speak to the fact that they shouldn't have been and weren't as important. They weren't players. But like the reason I thought Graham creating the Rugrats was because remember how he like blindsided Cornet?
Yes.
He's not even a player.
Because his coach came in and was like, oh, we need to vote out Shona, who is the weakest person on our tribe. And basically like a majority alliance formed to take out the quote unquote popular kids as they do.
It was fun.
So it's a fun season. And I think as well,
Tigers versus Rebel had a similar start. So,
and what I think is interesting is that when people talk about, especially in reaction initially to like, oh, could a Survivor season happen in 26 days? Survivor South Africa Champions was 27 days. And they were often going to Tribal Council in the post-merge like every day, every other day.
Yeah, they merged like at a normal time, like a day 18, and they just went to Tribal every day. They were exhausted, like you could tell.
Yeah.
Anyway, not that I would necessarily endorse that as a structure, but great season. And okay, we think we got the first one and we agreed, which is great because we didn't have a tiebreaker because only the two of us have seen it. So
speaking of tiebreakers, should we go to Survivor South Africa Philippines?
Perfect segue, not on purpose. Survivor South Africa Philippines, which is the season that created our friendship, Mike Bloom. And also I love Survivor South Africa, where I think it'll be this moment where we heard, oh, they went to Rocks in episode 2. What happened? We need to check this out. And to this day, I think one of the wildest moments in Survivor history, they went to Rocks in episode 2. What? Are we going to be able to top that moment?
Like that kind of does define the season in a weird way, like a forward thinking. When you think about the entire season as a whole, you go back to that rock draw and you're just like, that kind of is the tone of Philippines, which is what also drew me into Survivor South Africa. What was this, like 6-7 years ago? I didn't know about this. And they're like, this season is absolutely cracked. You have to check it out. I did. And I was like, this is incredible. I am now seated, ready for Survivor South Africa, the next one. I didn't go back and watch the previous ones. It was like a 4-year gap at that point. But this for me felt like the beginning of Survivor South Africa in my mind. And to watch a rock draw happen in Survivor US, this has happened not that often. If you don't remember, 3 times over 46 seasons. This isn't like, for me, 1 season, but I guess 6 seasons.
No, it was the reboot. It was the second episode of the reboot.
And like, did they have rocks in the first 4 or 5 seasons of Survivor South Africa? Was that a tiebreaker thing?
It might have been. I can't even remember.
They might have done like the pass votes thing.
To see it happen that quickly, and it's like bizarre what's going on. And then you get some other crazy characters like was it Martinez or something his name was, being this just out of left field player who ends up quitting the show. And then the whole post-merge and the ultimate winner is just, the rock draw feels like it's sort of embodied. That the spirit of the season is in that rock.
It's a good point, because I mean, the tough job for us on this particular season is that there are so many highlights of just the absolute shit show chaos that Survivor South Africa Philippines is. We have, as you mentioned, even one vote before, we have a case of Sheamus. You know, everyone trying to rally against Tom, but then this big alliance coming together to boot Sheamus instead. But then Ace, who's this huge wild card that only lasts 4 episodes, flips back to the minority alliance to force this rock draw. You have the huge PK, who was just like a pretty purple character out of nowhere. One of the votes before the merge just turns on his closest ally, Tevin, and ends up getting rid of him in episode 7. We have the idol train, where 3 idols get played in 1 tribal council, and Shanae, like a spare vote is thrown out to Shanae, and she ends up getting voted out.
1-1,
yeah, in a tiebreaker. You have You have the whole thing with Werner playing the idol on Jean to get rid of Katinka, and then the very next episode, when we think Werner is the one that has this game on lock, he's driving the bus. Everyone decides to turn on him. It's tough because like there also isn't an encompassing moment of just the WTF winner that is Tom Schwartz, who I think is one of the biggest personalities to ever win the show in Survivor history. But I think that to your point, Peridiam, if you want a representation of just all the havoc that was happening over the course of the season, the fact that on the second vote that this tribe went to, another Luzon, they end up going to rocks and a deadlock on day 6. That's all you need to hear.
Yeah, Mike, you ran through every moment I had, so I think it's good we kind of nailed that one. The only one I had was, Tom winning in and of itself as a defining moment. That's something we had in the US sometimes, like actually the win or the loss could be the defining moment. And I think with Tom winning, part of that is there. Like, had Werner won, it would have been too clean, too neat for this crazy season where they went to rocks in episode 2. Tom winning personified the insanity of the season when Homer Simpson won Survivor, and it was insane. So I think you could have that, and that would be the last moment that I would put there as, in addition to all the great moments that you listed. But I do think going to rocks personifies that itself, and it's more of a defining moment that we remember, the image of them all going to rocks. And Tom's there too, drawing a rock. Palessa is such a huge part of that. Their relationship is so defining to the game. I mean, you could even have Palessa voting for Tom. In some ways, that could be like the defining moment. But I do think we get Palessa, we get Ace, like Annalise was voted for here. All of the Luzon members obviously are tied up in that, except for poor Sweet Seamus, who went to the insanity in episode before. So I think that defines it. As much as unfortunately you don't get a lot of the great Mindanao players, you don't have Martinez there, you don't have Tevin, PK, Werner, John, like crazy good cast across the board.
Amazing.
But I do think that rocks personifies even their insanity. It traveled over to the other beach, and then everyone's just trying to out crazy each other for the next 18 episodes. So yeah, I don't think we can get past the moment they kind of put Survivor South Africa on the map in episode 2.
Yeah. I think even though there's so much to talk about with this season, I think it's my favorite of all of South Africa. It's
one of my favorite seasons of all time.
Is it your favorite season of all time?
It's not even my favorite South Africa season, but it is still one of my favorites.
What I would say is we spoiled the bejesus out of it, but if you all
should watch it. These are all the best moments.
No, but if you all loved the character-driven disorder of Survivor 46, like this is its soul sister.
This
I
is
think.
I think this takes it to another level even.
I think especially when it comes to like the personal dislike as well. Like people did not like each other out there on the island.
And then it was a gift they kept on giving. I mean, Tom won, and then he did that shirtless cat calendar.
And then remember when him and PK actually boxed each other after like PK threatened to punch him in the face?
What? Oh, this is lore I didn't know about.
Yeah. Oh yeah. PK threatens to punch Tom like in the show, and then they did have a post-show boxing.
I did reference this season recently, a couple months ago on Survivor, during Survivor 46, actually, very fittingly in one of my videos, where I talked about Tom and his like bizarre backwards strategy of like becoming the goats. Basically, he's like, I'm going to assume the goat position.
The tallest trees catch the
right,
most wind.
And I loved it. And I'm like, I don't know if that's exactly. He's sort of painting his story in a very good light here. But it kind of sounds really nice. And if you're comparing it to the person he's sitting next to in the final 2, who's like, I kind of got lucky and happenstance. It's like,
it was not a good final tribal performance.
I kind of like Tom's retelling of his story better. I'll vote for that guy. So, but overall, just the whole, it's weird to think that like episode 2 defines this season, because usually it's the post merge, and there are so many any one of these big moments on this season could really encapsulate it on most other seasons. But in this case, it is really just like it's just a collage of just WTF, and it starts here. And this is such a huge moment when you consider what it takes to get a rock draw in Survivor. So yeah, I'm totally fine with that. I do think some people will definitely push back and say like, no, this moment or that moment. I would probably, I could see it. I could see some people.
It's a good problem to have, that there are just so many big moments. Yes, it doesn't involve arguably the main character of the season in Werner, but again, the general timbre of the season.
Werner was too normal for this season. Werner's atonal to the season.
No. You can't say this guy is too normal when he ate an idol clue within the first 2 episodes of the show.
We could have put that in, and I can't believe that I passed over it, considering I just referenced it due to claim to fame, stealing the idea. At least they had a blender in a way that Werner did not. He just had water eating that clue. And that was,
Pizza.
again, the most cognitively sound person on the season. And he was eating a clue. So that's where we were at with that. Yeah, I think going to RHAP, I'll always remember I just started covering Survivor New Zealand. And I was like, oh, Survivor South Africa, should we do that? Is that on me? I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to keep up with this one podcast a week. And then when they went to ROX, I'm like, I guess I'm going to. How can I not? And then I messaged Mike Bloom. I'm like, you like podcasting? Help me, Paul. Not like that, because it hadn't happened yet.
Even before that phrase came in, yeah.
The friendship began. It's like, why are you calling me Paul? What do you know is going to happen in the future? Let's get to some of that future. But I think going to ROX is right. Island of the Idols.
Island of Secrets.
Island of Secrets.
Technically,
Island of the Idols.
No, well, it technically did air about like 2 months before Island of the Idols happened.
Well,
also, to be fair, I think one of the best moments on the season involves what could be described as an Island of Idols. So, if you remember the end of this season.
Yeah, so that's definitely one that I was thinking.
We'll talk about. I've actually written down Island of the Idols. I don't even know where my brain went. I'm meant to be a global expert on the Island of Secrets. Don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. In saying that, Island of the Idols, we had a pretty dark, defining moment. And I do think possibly we're going to go to a similar place with this. I have one moment here as the only one I have in my like main moment column, and we can talk about some others. But whenever I recommend South Africa to people, I'm like, yeah, this is a good season, but it gets dark. And I do think that's the tone of at least the second half of it, due to this, where Jacques pumped up from some other possibly defining moments we could talk about, where he bluffed the idol, didn't use the idol, everyone fell for it, everyone was angry about it, and he swore. He said F word. People didn't like it.
I think he said like I'm the biggest mother effer here, and I'm going to take you all down.
We called it the Mother Jacques incident.
I was just laughing, like, what is, like, I've watched too much Big Brother to care about.
That's the thing.
We were literally asking, we're like, does this mean
I'm guessing the culture is different. I don't know.
It's not. We are.
It was I think it was the very particular subset. I mean, basically, what I usually refer to Island of Secrets as is a better edited Redemption Island, where there was a
faint praise.
There was a group that came together, and while there were some scattershot votes at the merge that I certainly have actually as one of my highlights, it did largely emerge that there was like this core group of people that were together since the beginning and kind of had a shared sense of morality and faith that they used to summarily kind of look down upon others, and use, to your point, Peridiam, we see this classic Big Brother use some of those tactics to otherize the outcasts out there. And so it was this simultaneous, not only a pagonging of, okay, this majority alliance is just picking off everybody around them, but they're also doing it for almost personal reasons as well. They're trying to justify why, okay, we are the better players because we're playing the game the right way and they are not.
Yeah. So I would say it's definitely my least favorite of the South African seasons I've seen, of the 4 of them. And it's like the inverse of what happens with Boston Rob, where it's like if good guy Boston Rob shows up and just dominates the season, almost, I do think Rob gets a little more pushback here. And I'm talking about Rob from Survivor South Africa, not Boston Rob. But like what you described was I really don't like that self-righteous feeling going in. That's my number one least favorite thing watching these shows, is this like, we are better than you for whatever reason. And it's like, yeah, it happened with Jacques in the middle of the season. I really didn't like it. And it was sort of a recurring undertone throughout all of it. It just sort of came to a head here. And that's probably the defining moment. I did think that there was one other moment, but Shannon, were you going to say something?
No, I think that just it wasn't necessarily that it was like against the culture of South Africa. I think it might have just been against the culture of the Amigos.
That's true.
And they iced out Jacques, and it was really dark. They took him to a really, really bad place, and it was too much and too far and too personal. And it does define, unfortunately, a lot of the tone of that season. You can't talk about the season without talking about that moment. It changed everything, and it does unfortunately involve like pretty much all the main characters, with Jacques as the underdog, with the kind of suppressive power of the Amigos. I mean, some of the other Amigo moments, there is some great stuff here. If we want to get past like some of the less, you can just
say Doral.
Doral. I don't know that Doral is defining, probably for you, Mike Bloom. But I'm now doing this.
Remember that time he made a fake idol and then he lost it in the ocean?
He lost it in the ocean. Doral was sweet. But
remember that time he almost failed a challenge where he was given the cheat code ahead of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're the one person alive who maybe Doral, maybe like Doral's family, who's like Doral is the main character of that.
Remember when he
season.
said that he'd spend $1 million on 1 million bananas at the final tribal council?
Oh my gosh.
He really did say that, and we went through, we're like, is it all at one time? Is it a lifetime supply? And we talked about it for way too long. But the moment that I think Peridiam was going to reference his own island of the idols, and I think that's why the chart got it so wrong. But I do think possibly you think about the final 5 where
for sure.
Nicole, there was going to be a whole women thing, and then Nicole decided that women empowerment was empowering Rob. They were going to turn on Rob, and then they decided, actually, we're not going to empower. We're not going to take out Rob. We're going to empower Rob. So all the idols were played in its own idol train to the point where Steffi, who had wanted to turn on Rob,
she gets the read.
But she would have gone home anyway.
But she gets votes against, and
yeah,
then
she
would have.
And then as the votes come in, Nicole has that moment where Steffi turns to her, and she just coldly stares at her head and says, "You flipped on the amigos."
Okay, right. I couldn't remember the exact. Is that what it was? In my head, it was like, this is what you get for turning on the amigos. I couldn't even remember exactly, but it was like so much that amigo mob boss mentality. I remember being like, this is like the tableau where like they're giving the idols to each other. And it was like that amigo power. And it definitely does like kind of crown Rob. So I think that is defining in Rob's win. I have amigos punish Steffi.
I was gonna say, I feel like if you're looking at this from the gameplay is going on, this is sort of a climax where it's like I think Rob won immunity here, but either way, like he had lost a bit of control by the end.
Played his idol on.
He played it on Nicole.
What
I think Nicole played hers on like Letitia, and he played hers on Doral, and then Letitia had an idol that she had herself.
What it was Rob had an idol, and then they're like, we should finally turn on Rob, but he has an idol the last time he can play it. What we'll do is we'll convince him not to play the idol. We're all not going to play our idol to show the jury we didn't even need our idols, and then we'll vote out Rob. But Rob also won immunity, and then Nicole was like, probably we shouldn't have turned on him. Also, we can't. He's like doubly immune. So then went to him and was like, Steffi was going to turn on you, and they were like, what? Turn on me? She's a bad person. That's bad moral code. That's the whole morality theme of the season in and of itself. And then they humiliated her, and then they said, you turned on the amigos, and that's how I see it in my mind's eye.
Yes, and that's why I probably would put it above the Jacques.
Oh, you would?
Because I think, to me, everything from Island of now you got me saying Island of Secrets.
I did it.
It runs through Rob Bentley. Rob Bentley puts together the single best season performance from a Survivor winner I have ever seen. I was thinking about what are some of his best moments. Like the CPay vote is probably one of his biggest moves where where he's able to turn everything. But I think the Steffi move to me more so encompasses like not only Rob's dominance, but also again this like really icky moral tone to the season of Nicole trying to feel like there needs to be a justifiable reason behind it of, it's not just that Steffi's the only one left over and she's a big threat, but no, it's because she dared turn on the amigos and she must burn in hell for it.
Yeah. I have like Rob winning in and of itself could be defining. One of the moves you think of is Rob telling Mike that he made up an advantage from the Island of Secrets, apparently. And he made up a fake advantage where Mike's like, I don't know if I can turn on him now. So that
it was that he got to look at someone's vote while he's casting a vote of like, oh, Mike, you went in and cast your vote. I get to see who you voted for before I vote for somebody.
Using production as a strategy.
People were scared enough to turn on him, and then it was like, oh, now like the teacher's looking, and so
or even when that one like the tribal council where Maba is voted out, where Jacques says, listen, I'm not bluffing. I am playing the idol this time. Do not vote for me. Yet Rob has so many people in line that Mike and Kubis, or Mike and Maba, I believe, both vote for Jacques, knowing that their votes will be nullified rather than voting for Rob.
Maba takes an idol actually out of the urn and then immediately goes home with it. Probably if you were to like put a chart of the longest time holding an idol, Maba would have to be the least because it was roughly 3 minutes. So that's interesting because that I think is another moment that shows Jacques as the underdog versus like Rob's dominance in that moment and kind of like how much people were drinking the Kool-Aid that they voted for Jacques. If you wanted another Jacques moment, the moment that leads to the Mother Jacques incident, I think is the one where he unbuttons his shirt and bluffs and plays the idol. I think there was a few where he's bluffing the idol, but I think that was the tribal council. And Rob winning in and of itself, as I said, his fake advantage and the CPay blindside. In saying that, Mike, you want to go with the final 5? I'm putting my vote on Mother Jacques. Rob's still there being mean to Jacques. I love Rob, but he is still there doing that. I think his winning game is super impressive, but I think that all the main characters are part of it. And to me, it just speaks to the tone. And for me, friends rule where they're not friends.
Friends rule.
No, the friends rule where the one with the Mother
friendship.
Jaka incident is what I think about. So
Oh, that's interesting because I would say that it's the one where Rob wins.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I'm breaking this
With-
tie here, I think I'm gonna go more. The two moments were these two moments. Were the only two that came to my head. That was like, what would I define this season with? And it's either when everything just sort of comes to a head at the Jacques vote, or the final five, where it's sort of more gameplay oriented, but it's not. It's also infused with all of the just dour self-righteousness that comes out of these players and justifying. And I feel like for me, I ultimately will go with the final five votes because Rob plays such a strong game that when I walked away from this season, I said he's debatably top 3 best player for gameplay, but he might even be number 1. I don't know. I haven't really thought too hard, and it's been now like 5 years, but his game is just phenomenal that he plays in this season. If you're looking for like another player up there with what I would say is Boston Rob, Kim Spradlin, these dominant winners who just crush the season, almost create like a cult around the guy to the point where they're just flipping over on each other just to make sure that he's good with them. This comes to a head in the final 5 vote where 3 idols get played. Rob's already immune by default. The number 1 player that's against him goes home, and it's just the steamroll keeps it. The biggest shock is that he doesn't win by such a crazy. The final vote isn't even that.
4.
Yeah, I'm like Nicole it was like 4-4. I'm like, is this another Tom or like what are we doing?
Well,
is Nicole winning?
I mean, I think Rob did piss some people off by the end. I think Jacques certainly,
he did, for sure.
was not happy with what happened. And listen, Nicole came from the pageant world. It's one reason why she ends up targeting the first boot of this season. And
Taylor Hale of it all.
Yeah, and so she was able to, I think, provide some answers at least in that moment. But yeah, I think the final 5. I think I completely co-sign everything about Rob Bentley. I think if people are looking for like, can a Boston Rob Kim-esque game of dominance be played in the modern era? You know, this is a season that threw a slew of idols and advantages out, and the fact that
islands of them, some might
say. And the fact that Rob was able to take advantage of that, and as he talks about in his final tribal council speech, actually use that as what a 22nd player. It to me is one of the best games I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's kind to the season, I think, to have it be remembered for something, even with the self-righteous, that's a little bit more gameplay-oriented, a little bit more positive than how negative the Mother Jacques incident was. So I'm not mad at it. I do think it, wraps up Rob's win in a way that is very important and has so much Nicole as well. And Nicole, let's not forget, was like an Angelina-type character who was just funny and ridiculous. So I think having her there where she... just that moment, you turned on the amigo. Whatever she said that's in my mind, whatever Mandela effect I have, or whatever that phrase was, is hilarious and good content. So I think that works as a defining moment. Moving it on. We could say,
speaking about Nicole and people being immune, Survivor Season 8, Immunity Islands.
Very good. Is that what it's called? Isn't it Island of the Idols? No. Immunity Island in 2021, where... I have a few moments here. I feel like we have Nicole's win. We also have Chappies. And I feel like so many of the moments for me are in Chappies.
I think it all has to run through Chappies. So the big one...
They did all run through Chappies.
Yeah, exactly. It's
he
probably...
swam a lot.
And ate a lot as well. So that's certainly one of the first instance of Chappie's Diner. But to me, I think one of the most memorable moments from this season is when everything comes to a head, especially in this era of Survivor where there was a lot of talk about like, okay, is this more of a game body season at a time where the late 30s of Survivor was kind of really strategy forward. But then everything comes out at Tribal Council where, Chappies is doing things that are just getting on the nerves of everybody. They know about Chappie's Diner, that he's squirreling away all this food for himself, but he keeps winning immunity, so they can't get rid of him. And then his tightest ally, Santini, is also an agent of chaos, and it has an idol, or it is safe through other advantages. And then it just comes to this head at Tribal Council where they accused Chappies of cheating, that they had the auction that episode, and then it was like, oh, he brought food back when he wasn't supposed to, and he's been fueling himself to win challenges when we can't. And it was to the point where Nico has to step in and be like, remember when
more a trial than a Tribal Council.
Remember when some of you went on that reward challenge a couple episodes ago and you brought food back? Like, he gives it to Warda, who ends up getting voted out in this episode. There was the entire shenanigans where Warda holds the rice bag hostage that she gets in the auction, knowing she might be going, and Chappies tries to switch it out with a bag of sand.
Indiana just right behind her. It's that in itself, that image itself is so funny. The thing, I was gonna have Chappie's Diner where he'd been, you know, stealing the rice and like cooking his own food. Just the image of him in Chappie's Diner, that was what originally came to mind. But I do think this tribal council that you're talking about, the infamous stealing tribal council, does sum up a lot of that, where what it is like, well, Chappie stole, it's like, but also you guys stole and brought food back from the reward, but also Warda stole the rice, but actually Chappie stole the rice from Warda, to the point where the solution that Nico has to give is, you all have stolen
all
so
bad.
much, then maybe we just call this one a wash and stop stealing. So I do think that probably speaks to a lot of the chaos of the season.
Honestly, I'm impressed by Nico. I was like, yeah, what's the ruling here, Nico? Didn't he break a rule? And then Nico's like, well, you're all bad here. You all screwed up. Let's go rewind the tapes here. Nico kind of gets there. I'm sure he had a conversation with some of the production staff or something after, because it's like, wait, yeah, they all got sticky fingers. That was the name of it. They got sticky fingers.
Like, if we're gonna, like, if we're going to discipline him, then you all need to be disciplined. We can't like kick you all out of the game. So all of you shut up, move on, and stop stealing.
Right.
I think it also speaks to the narrative of the post-merge, which is really interesting, where we have, you know, at the merge, this Zamba group that has maintained, you know, a lot of cohesion at the merge just gets completely outdone by the Vunas, who come together and do the idol play alongside the like clutch immunity wins and everything. And they have a good rhythm going, including in the Thai Destinies tribal council. And then it just all falls apart. Anesu is too big of a threat. Kieran and Tyson and Warda flip and vote her out. And we think, okay, Chappies and Santini are screwed. But in this next episode, this is where Chappies wins immunity and Santini finally plays the idol that she found back in the day, and Warda ends up going. So that also, I think, comes into the narrative that really takes up the majority of this end game too.
Yeah, I feel like I actually rewatched this tribal council because I was trying to jog my memory a little bit before this podcast. It's like it's a 20-minute tribal council, and all they're doing is arguing about the food.
Yeah, that speaks to it too.
They bring up Nico, the host, in like the first 5 minutes, and they're like, "Can you give us a ruling?" And then they argue for another 10 minutes before Nico's like, "So if you let me talk, I'll tell you what's going on here." Which is like, but he's like, "You know what? The drama is too good, and honestly, the answer I'm about to give is going to squash it." But it's just, yeah, this comes to a head, and then it just continues with Chappie's run. They just can't beat him because he's eating all the candy and he's got his little diner on the side.
Yeah.
But it's this tribal council for me, and I was watching it and I was like, I'll just watch a few minutes, but I ended up watching the whole thing.
Well,
I was just like, it was like 5 minutes before I was just sitting there watching him still arguing, and I'm like, this is so much fun. I want to rewatch the season, but I don't know.
That's hard to argue against if you watch the whole tribal council.
I pretty much did. It is that good. It's worth it.
Yeah.
Wasn't this also the tribal council where Chappie's like holds up his vote for Warda, being like, "This is for you, Anesu, Operation Destiny,"
Operation Destiny.
Yells it at the top of his lungs.
There's a lot going on. There's a lot of really positive stuff. Yeah, I do love like Nico in like the King Solomon role, where he's like, "I've listened to the arguments about whether we should cut up the baby, and you all suck." So yeah, I think that does bring in Chappie's Diner. It's a big Chappie's tribal council, but it includes everyone because they're all thieves. The other moments that I thought about, even though I think we're definitively going to a tribal council that you watched in its entirety, but Chappie's falling off at final immunity, I think kind of sums up the win and the loss at that point. I also think that if we're talking about the win and the loss, there's that challenge where everyone sits out except for Nicole and Chappie's. And I think that's one where Nicole keeps trying to get the ring, and it speaks to that determination, and Chappie's just like blitzes it, which speaks to Chappie. So I think that sums up a lot. The merge vote is a massive vote. I think we said one of our favorite merge votes in Survivor history, where Vuna in many ways are going to win. There's an idol play, but also Smash is going to steal Chappie's vote, but then there's going to be an idol played on Chappie's. Inesu is the double agent. A lot going on. It doesn't speak to the win because, as we said, Vuna are going to massively mess it up.
Oh my god! Like,
but it speaks to their win in that moment. Not the season win, but I think there's something there. Smash reneging on the Kieran vote at the final 6 probably also speaks to a lot of that endgame insanity. And I have a jokey one, which is Rainier pointing in the first episode. But I do think that we are on the stealing tribal council.
Yeah, I think especially when it speaks to just how cataclysmic the Vuna dynamics were. Again, I know that Anela and Nicole were involved to a certain extent, but like, if you need any better representation of how this group of bad news bears somehow gets the majority at the merge and then just completely falls apart because they all can't trust each other, nowhere is that better represented, where they are just yelling at each other. Yeah, like school children. Mr. Nico, Chappies was stealing.
You guys are stealing too, and you stole, and you guys are all thieves. There's what happened to honor among thieves, guys? There is a bit of a tinge of the self-righteousness that's from the previous season where it comes in. It's like, we didn't do anything wrong. We're in the right here. And then it's like, well, actually you're not. But then they try to justify it as they were. And he goes like, and they're all just, this is absurd, guys. What is this? But it's also Survivor. And that's what makes it so much fun. For me, this was the defining moment of the season. I think there's a lot that happens before leading up to this. And, it's hard to say if any of those moments are really going to define that whole season. I think that for me, this is just the easy one. It's all based on Chappie's, which is he is sort of the main character at that point. So even from the merge onward, where the idol gets played, he survives with that. Then Tyson, I think, plays the idol on him and negates all these votes. I think it just comes down to this moment right here, where this is all comes to a head, and it's just like you're in a free fall after this. With there's a lot of great moments after, like you pointed out, with the fire challenge that happens,
fire idol,
and then Tyson, I think, accidentally votes himself out almost in the 2-1-1 final four.
There's that whole thing where they reveal at tribal council that it's a final 2 instead of a final 3, and so there's like a lot of harried whispering where Chappies is trying to now bring Tyson over, being like, no, let's vote out Nicole, she's the biggest threat for immunity, and Tyson instead 2-1-1s himself out of the game.
That was wild. Oof.
I think that you could almost even have the auction as its own kind of defining moment option, because it's like Nicole again gets like the beggar's plate and she gets a lot there, and that's where Chappie steals the food. But I think that even leads into this tribal council. It's all in the same episode, and so that also encompasses that. It just does a lot.
I feel like I want to show Probst all of these incredible Final Four votes in International Survivor and say, look what we're missing. Look what we have been missing. And it's unfortunate because it's like, to be fair, up until season 35, there aren't that many wild Final Four votes in U.S. history.
But at least there's an opportunity to do so rather than completely closing off the chance.
That's the argument. Yeah, it's like, look, there is a case in point. People are playing Survivor, and they're wild and all over the world, except the U.S. It's a little bit boring in the U.S., but
I hope that's the name of the global season, Wild and All Over the World.
Well, that's great. Do you think that Jeff would be as excited, though, about a 2-1-1 as me? Jeff, do you understand in Global Survivor, there's so many 2-1-1s? Give them the chance. He'd be like, but fire. And I'd be like, but 2-1-1.
Yeah, he'd say, tell me more about this fire idol. You can force fire.
That
was Nick's game. That was, the top 2 vote getters make fire. I wasn't in favor of that, but anyway, it didn't really pan out in a way that
it didn't change anything, though.
Okay, so we did it. Well, you watched that whole tribal council. That should have spoke for itself. Rounding out Survivor South Africa here, we're gonna do Return of the Outcast, a returning season. This is my favorite Survivor South Africa season. This is the top 3 Survivor season for me of all time. I love it very much. And in that, I think I have one of my favorite moments of all time in Survivor history. I do feel personally connected to it. I should have brought it. It's in my drawer in the other room. The half a Steffi vote that Dino sent to me that has my initial on it, where he wrote for the Chizzy S&M. Hard for me to get past it. It has my initial on the vote. But even without that, watching the Steffi vote at the final 9, I feel like the final 9, we'll probably talk about later in this podcast, is often very pivotal, with no BS coming over the top, the underdogs getting this kind of victory that will lead to Dino's victory. So very much in the winner journey there. It's such an incredible vote. It's such an amazing blindside. It just, nothing will ever beat the feeling, I don't think, ever in Survivor history for me, of watching that happen and then also seeing it say for the Chizzy. Pause! Zoom in! Does that say Chizzy? I can't beat it for me. So it's a Steffi vote. But does anyone else have less personal connections to this of what it would be?
What do you think, Mike?
I don't think so. I know that, the end game of SA9, I would say, is a little more samey of like, okay, there's a little bit of debate about, okay, when do we get rid of Phil? And even when we can, he's winning immunity. But this was in a vote that, and it's a slew of post-mergers going at the beginning of this post-merge. This is perhaps the crowning achievement, because we had been talking up to that point that, like, Steffi was in the position to win. We were so impressed by her that she was coming in, obviously still a physical beast, but had the Powerpuff Girls Alliance, was making all these different bonds with all these people. And then it's one of those classic moments that we get, especially in New Era Survivor, where everyone...
They actually called the Powerpuff Girls, or did I just say they should be called the Powerpuff? I think that they were.
I think they said they were the full package. That's what it was.
I said, why are you the Powerpuff Girl?
But it's this moment where everyone kind of looks around and compares notes and says, because they, all the post-mergers had turned on Dante and they said, okay, we're turning on Meryl next, but you had this no BS alliance, these 3 pre-merge guys of Dino, Felix, and Phil saying, okay, but what if it was Steffi? Steffi is the much bigger threat here. And so they are going to grab Meryl and they are going to grab Tajan as well, who is also on the outs because his closest ally, Tony, ends up getting voted out at the merge. And it's to Shannon's point, one of these like classic stories we get of one group being able to come over the top in these voting blocks, and all of a sudden the biggest power player is taken out. And if we're talking about like the power of the pre-mergers, I feel like that does get really represented in the form of this vote.
Yeah. And I feel like I strategically reference it all the time where I'm like, cut into the majority on your own terms. If they're cutting into themselves, don't let them do it in a way that serves them, help it serve you. So for me, I think personally, strategically, structurally to the story, that is it for me. There are two moments in the season that just can't be beaten, and, you know, getting to watch someone I love so much in Dino win. I think it's this vote. And then for me, Dino winning final immunity is that moment. But I think that, you know, that might be more personal, but I still think it's amazing. The other ones I had, one of my favorite episodes of the season is where it speaks to a loss, but this like underdog journey where they almost win. Phil, Shona, and Dino in the vote where Shona's going to go home. They get really, really close. They flip Palessa. They're going to win on this like vote split gone wrong. And then Phil gets cold feet and votes out Shona. And they got so close. They're like, we're so far back. They made it up. They were ahead. And then they lost. And it's one of my favorite, like,
tough to say that defines the season, but it's a great moment. Of watching the winner, the eventual winner, and like these players that go far into the season completely, botch it here. It's a great.
That wasn't on Dino.
To be fair, it wasn't Dino, but
it was a loss for the winner.
Right, because it was also the thing, right, where like Shona had hidden the fake idol at Tribal Council, and they were like, oh, they were expecting her to play it, and the fact that she didn't made Phil feel like the plan wasn't going through, and so he decides to stick with Shona and accidentally gets her voted out in the process.
Yeah, I do think the other moment I had was like the Breakfast Club forming and then immediately flipping on themselves, where Chappies goes did also speak to the tenor of what the season would be. But I think that's obviously Dino's not even there. So I do think this one it was the first one I've had in green for the Steffi vote. So I don't think that
I didn't have too much, honestly. I looked at it, I'm like, you know, there's a lot of great stuff to talk about, a lot of big characters. It's a returning player season, so I feel like it's usually going to be gameplay oriented a little bit more. And that's like, you know, unfortunately the Pinty experience not going to be in the top two probably. But
you know what I mean, when Pinty broke Shona's back during the middle of that challenge?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of drama for the returning players in the pre-merge here, and it kind of cracks me up because I didn't know, and also I didn't know half this, like I didn't know the champions at all coming into this, and they dominate.
So
they're like, a lot of them are in the end game. I think almost all except for
four of the final five, I believe.
Yeah, but it's fascinating to watch these players come together from like 10 years ago, and you know, I was like, this is wild. I should watch this season now. And I should have watched it.
Do that. That's the takeaway. If that's what we get out of this, then it will all be worthwhile. Please watch it. Let me know, by the way, if you do. Please message me your thoughts and please do it.
Yeah,
you know,
I need to watch that. I need to watch UK. They're like my two holes in my international experience. I just haven't gotten around to it, but you know.
Well, I really like UK, but I think start with SA5. I really love that season. I love both of those seasons actually in different ways. These are all my children. Don't make me choose, but I prefer champions. Probably.
I never cared for Island of Secrets.
Island of Secrets.
I still like Island of the Idol / Secrets. No. I still think it's worth watching. I still think it's better than a lot of US seasons, and probably better than a lot of the Australian seasons. A couple of the Australian seasons we're going to talk about. But yeah, it's the lowest of these 5 South African seasons for me. But I still think there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think Survivor South Africa personally is a great show. If you haven't watched it and you've only watched Australian Survivor, if you're dipping into the international stuff, I would absolutely recommend it. All of these seasons are worth watching, and they'll all give you different tastes, different flavors of the ice cream. This is a palette of Survivor here, and it's only in like 4 seasons from my perspective, but the 5th one sounds great too. So I would absolutely recommend this. I haven't made this video yet. It's been on my docket for 7 years.
Video.
I mean, this could be clips from it where I use what you guys tell me, you guys are saying, and it's just like, listen to these two people who know everything about this stuff. I've been wanting to make a video recommending the show because it's really, really good. It's some of the best stuff. If you love Survivor, you'll love it. But yeah, it hasn't come up yet, and I hope it returns one day. I really want it to come back. So
yeah. And I would say as well, if you feel like #when not if you feel like Australian Survivor is a little too unwieldy at 24 episodes, 24 players, 50 plus minute episodes, this is a much more manageable thing. South Africa, Philippines, 18 castaways. So, and sometimes it gets a little unwieldy. There's one season that has 21 players. Return of the Outcasts, just due to what Mnet was doing, did 24 episodes. So
yeah, that was a lot.
So it was that was a lot to get through. But by and large, if you're looking for, okay, for many reasons, I'm looking for like a bit of a break from US Survivor, this is something that I think harkens closer to those days, especially pre-New Era, than perhaps Australian Survivor does.
Yeah.
I feel like US is like more like the small, medium-sized variant where it's like 13 episodes. This is more like 16, 18 episodes. And then Australian Survivor is the large size, which is like 23, 24
400
episodes or so.
Yeah.
Or 5,
so
or 5,000.
It was 26. The first couple were 26. That's a lot. So we're going to
It's
have
a
to
lot
get
of
to a lot
Survivor.
of those defining moments, as you're saying. There's like
Right.
double the content, or probably even more than that. So there's a lot. We'll kind of go through here. New Zealand, Survivor New Zealand. We'll be talking about
Not as
seasons
much to
that are
talk about.
worthwhile.
Honestly.
Nicaragua, the first New Zealand season, is a season that is so barely in my brain that it barely counts. I'm really trying.
The best moment of this season, the melted bag of chocolate.
Yeah,
I have
baby.
it here. I literally have melted chocolate.
That defines,
so sad?
and it kind of fits.
I mean, it does define.
Here.
So for one of the rewards, because this was the first ever season of the New Zealand version of Survivor, they were in Nicaragua, and one of the rewards, like, you get a bag of chocolate, but it was just a Ziploc bag of melted crud, and that sort of represents both the budget quality of the season as well as a bit of the gameplay quality as well. Where
they played like melted chocolate.
Yeah, I mean, like the moment I would talk about from a strategic perspective that would stick out to me in terms of a defining moment would be the merge vote, where you kind of have this bro alliance of Tom and Mike and Lee and Jack, and they end up getting flipped on as one of the big moves by its eventual winner, Avi or RV. So I think that would probably be from a strategic perspective.
The person that hung out with in New Zealand.
Exactly. One of the bigger moves. Or you could say, if you want to go for a random personal moment, when I think it was the name Sala at the final tribal council said that Barb was like a turd that needs to be flushed down the toilet.
Oh, yeah. That does stick out now that you've said it. I asked Nick because he covered the season, and he also was like kind of shrug emoji about it, but he was like, if he remembered it being a big deal when Shannon got voted out. I don't know that I can give any, like, I remember enough about the strategy, and it should stay with me if it's defining, right? Like, I know that maybe it's on me that I don't remember it well enough, but I feel like as a defining moment, maybe it should stay with me. I think the melted chocolate did stick out, unfortunately, but that would be a really sad thing to give it. That would be unfair. I think, remember when Jack got voted out and he wasn't wearing pants and you could see his butt? That sticks out. Like, to the point where I didn't remember it, but then when I looked at the class, like, all I could see was butt when I remembered. So there's maybe,
all I can see is butt.
Maybe something there. And then the other moment that I had, and it's not a defining moment, but like the Friends rule, the one with Redemption Island. I don't remember one specific Redemption Island moment, but they every second episode was a vote, and every second episode was Redemption Island. All I remember is them being at Redemption Island. Do I remember what happened there? I don't. But like,
it was so bad. They brought back 2 people at the final 5, and then they just got voted out again immediately.
So maybe it's that. Maybe it's them coming back. Names escape me. Mike and then Nate, who was sort of like the older man, the former police officer.
Right.
Maybe it's that. Them 2 people coming back and then getting immediately voted out, which was the culmination of, again, every second episode being purely Redemption Island. That's defining to me. That define, like, you can't explain or recommend the season.
I was gonna say, other than the bag of chocolate, my defining moment is when I realized that we were gonna be watching a whole episode dedicated to Redemption Island almost all season. Cause like, hot off the press, 7 years ago now, this is my least favorite season of Survivor across every season I've ever watched.
That feels fair. That doesn't.
And it's only one of two in New Zealand. I feel terrible for New Zealand because I made a whole video dedicated to one of my least favorite seasons in the history of the show. I despise this season. I find it the worst structurally from a production standpoint. They include one of my least favorite twists. Redemption Island, all across the board, episode. It's like if they took Redemption Island from season 22 in Survivor and just gave every other episode to watching whoever's there. I mean, to be fair, that could be kind of fun depending on, some of those players. Stacey,
Redemption Island was bad enough as it was.
South Pacific.
It's awful.
It's awful. It's awful TV.
Yeah, they made a 2-hour episode for one cycle and split it between nights.
I had to fast forward. I couldn't get through it.
Yeah, so it'd be like
so boring.
So like in the first episode, it would be like, oh, reward challenge, and then vote somebody out, and then like the next episode would be like, oh, but then we also have the Redemption Island challenge, and then the immunity challenge, and so it was just a terrible way to bring it back. part of me kind of thinks the melted bag of chocolate kind of represents that quality that just looks like
that's
you watch it. You watch it from afar and it looks like Dookie, and like if you want to taste it, it's somewhat palatable, but like at first look, it's gag.
No, but it's not palatable. We shouldn't even compare it to chocolate. Even
but there's
chocolate
a scene I've
edited
edited this in one of my YouTube videos where they're actually kind of happy with the bag of chocolate, and Barb is eating it, and it's like, this is not that bad, and everyone starts eating it. They're like, yeah, it's okay. And I'm like, they tried to turn, like, the producers like, edit this into the best we can make with whatever they're saying. Melted bag of chocolate. I don't know. I mean, I hope not. That would be, probably not anymore, but don't think they return in season 2.
Yeah.
But still, yeah.
Season 2 had the tuna cans.
There's just no moment.
Whenever I buy those tuna cans for Peter, I'm like, this was the sponsor.
There's just no moment in this season for me that really defined it, other than like the despair of me hitting the fast forward button. And then watching the bag of chocolate, and then like I heard about this, I think, going in, and it was just, it lived up to the hype. It was the one thing that absolutely lived up because it was so funny, and I've used it before a couple times.
Oh, and I totally forgot that they basically voted people out on the first day as well to fill up Redemption Island too.
Redemption Island, I can't.
A confluence of terrible twists.
This is it. The one where Peridiam fast forwards through. Yeah, yeah, the one where Peridiam fast forwards through Redemption Island. That's the moment for me. It's specifically you fast forwarding through. Anyway, I'm going Redemption Island.
That defined it for me. My experience watching this season was defined by me fast forwarding through so much of nothing. And it was watching the same people come back and do nothing and then get voted out again. It's like Nate, they just keep getting voted out. And then the finals, there was this guy, Tom, who was kind of a challenge beast underdog almost, but then he loses, and I'm like, it wasn't even that compelling, to be fair. Sorry if you're watching.
Wow, I forgot he won 5 immunity challenges.
He won, so he set the he tied the record, but he was such a non-whatever in the gameplay, and it was like, and then he didn't win. He ends up getting crushed by the more social, likable player in the final tribal. It's just like, what's the story? I mean, I like the winner. He's a nice guy. He seems like a nice guy. Never met him. Spoilers.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Process of elimination.
Okay. Wait, but what are we doing? Are we doing bag of chocolate? Or are we doing
I voted chocolate. You voted Redemption Island.
Peridiam, what are you?
What you saying? Redemption is in like?
Yeah, the one with Redemption. Just damn it, Redemption. Just
I'm doing bag of chocolate. Sorry.
Yeah, baby.
Bag of chocolate.
That's very, very upsetting.
The one with the melted bag of chocolate.
I put it there for lols, but that's what it is. Let's move on to a winner you've met and a season that's better.
Much better. Holy moly, the difference, the night and day difference between New Zealand, Nicaragua, and New Zealand, Thailand. Oh my gosh, I came into this season, I was just like, thank you. This feels
no Redemption Island.
No Redemption Island. I actually
but it's redemption from the previous season.
Amazing. Yeah, they redeemed themselves by not including redemption. I love the twist. I thought the twist was good. It wasn't too impactful.
Sorry,
the outpost, one of the best cross-tribal
to the point where we stole it.
Yep.
For season 9 of Survivor South Africa. Yeah, good production, really fun season, really fun winner who made a move that I have in green here as the defining moment. The final 6.
It's 100%.
Yeah, it was a 3-2-1 vote on someone with an idol that they found together, but that wasn't
good enough. Who was the front
enough.
runner?
And she flipped the guy who was friends with him outside of the show that they somehow stupidly cast together.
So
they cast 2 people who knew each other by accident.
New Zealand's very small. That was also true on New Zealand Traders season 2. I'm like, and we were one season without people knowing each other. It is a small country, but so I mean, look, they had it in South Africa too, where people know each other. They've had it in Australia, where we have pictures of people. They've also had it in the US. We can't just put this on New Zealand.
Oh yeah,
they were really good friends. I mean, like Pat and Ali from Heroes, Healers, Hustlers, I feel like weren't really good friends, but like
exactly
helped her move a mattress or something. No, this vote at the final 6 is one of the best votes. It's 3-2-1. So good. It's Lisa's winning story. It's a crowning move, but it's also Matt's loss, and he was such a big character, but it's also Matt and Dave's friendship, which was so essential to then Dave's loss. These are all 3 really crucial characters here. Everyone in the final 6 is involved and important in that in a way that I think makes sense, and I don't think you can go past it. I will say just her win 4-3 over Tess could be the moment that you might look at, but I do.
I forgot
that she wears.
Yeah, of course, the RHAP
winning in
shout out.
How could we?
I forgot that Tess voted incorrectly every vote at the merge. Where that was yet another 2-1-1, right? Where
have your first ever 2-1-1.
Where because Tara actually says
Tara quit. Yeah.
No, vote me out. I don't want to make it to the final 3. And Tess is but we can still get Dave.
Yeah.
And she almost wins.
The 2-1-1's very fun. The 2-1-1's very fun for me, and does also kind of speak to like Tessa's dynamic and her loss and Lisa's win, Dave there as well. But I think we get more of that in the final 6 where Tess also votes wrong. Like it's all part of that.
Oh yeah.
So
I think it's impossible. Like the moment you look at the season, it's great across the board. I love the cast, the gameplay, the flow of it, the narrative. The winner is fantastic. Got to hang out with her in her hometown. Got a tour of her entire town. It was amazing. Christchurch, New Zealand.
Did
Shout
you
out.
meet like 5 different Survivor New Zealand players? Just hey,
I
look.
Didn't. No, it was
That's how they all know each other.
yeah. So I met
Look
the
at my
entire
next door
merge
neighbor
tribe.
is.
They all lived on the same block.
Yeah, it's crazy. They live on the same street.
It was
Yeah.
a bit weird. They didn't cover that in the show. They just played it to Matt and Dave because they made sense in the narrative. But no, it was amazing. And Lisa is super cool. She wore the RHAP shirt at the finale to win it. That's mind blowing.
RHAP merch to win. Like,
right?
Will we ever top that? That was great.
Probably not. No. And this is a good season all around.
Well, I do think a lot of people in 47 could probably do the same. But
they redeemed the Thailand's name in the Survivor lore.
Yeah, and they redeemed Survivor New Zealand and Thailand. So
definitive #1 season in Thailand and #1 season of Survivor. What I've said before and I'll continue to say is like this is a great pastiche of sort of like what we call middle school Survivor of like your Chinas, your Gabones, etc. Where it's 18 people. There's some good strategy mixed in, but it's not like super complicated. There's enough advantages thrown in, but you have some really standout characters and a good mix of, you know, personalities as well as players at the same time. So I think it's a really solid season. And unfortunately, New Zealand goes out, but it does go out on a high note.
It does. And we did talk about that too. And it was unfortunate, but you know, from what I heard behind the scenes, the production was a little bit of a hot mess.
Much like a bag of chocolate.
Much like the bag of chocolate in season 1.
Just a hot
they
mess.
They didn't bring out the bag of chocolate in season 2. It was tucked away in the producer's tent.
Yes, but they did. But Tess did break a challenge and almost get critically injured.
That did happen. Yes, that was not the defining moment of, thankfully.
Look, and hey, some other seasons have done that too. Some other productions have done similar things, which we'll get into.
Oh yeah,
talk about
Survivor New Zealand. As we're saying, first, the way we've defined it probably speaks to how we would recommend those seasons. The first one is melted bag of chocolate, and the second is one of my favorite moves in Survivor history, and that's where we're at with New Zealand. To touch on UK, which Peridiam hasn't seen, but that's what we covered last year, and then we're going to get into Australia. For all the people who've been hanging out for Australia, we're going to get to you.
And we should also say, actually, I believe this might be the first time that you can talk to UK, Shannon, in a public forum on mic since they pretty much confirmed that it's been shelved again, right?
Yeah, but we're not if now. I can't give we're not if to everything. Maybe it'll come back. I don't have as much faith. But it's sad because I really liked UK, and it started off really slowly.
I've heard it was decent. I heard initially it was rough, and then it turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah, it's basically like watching the evolution of Survivor kind of packed into a season, right, Shannon? That was kind of the way that you sold it,
which was really fun.
Is that initially the old people and the women are getting targeted early for tribe strength, but then
injured.
Yeah, but then once the swap hits, then we actually get some pretty interesting dynamic gameplay where people are flipping on their original tribes. Then I agree, it just absolutely hits the nos in the post-merge, probably culminating in, I imagine, Shannon, the moment you are going to flip, which is the Tanuke vote, which is the eventual season winner, Matthew. He was in so tight with Tanuke and Nathan from the very beginning, but he decides in that moment, it's almost like what happened with Steffi a little bit, where Tanuke leads this charge against Doug, who is a fellow front runner. And so we thought, okay, Doug's gone. Tanuke surely has to win. But Matthew is starting to have some second thoughts. And so he helps organize Christopher and Pegleg and Hannah and Leilani, all these sort of outcasts, almost Rob Cesarino style, honestly, to come together and take out Tanuke.
Yeah, she was such a big character. It's like the flip of that speaks to that whole structure of the post-merge. It's a massive part of the winning game. It's something we discussed at length. Chris is a huge part of that as well. And these are like, I think, the two most important. Tanuke, Doug's just gone. Doug was important, but like Tanuke, Chris, Matt, all like essential to the season. They're all a really big part of this. The final 9. It's kind of like that big structural winning crowning move that Lisa has, but for Matt. And it's, I think, the most memorable part of the season, as well as defining. And I think defining a lot of where the strategy went and the peak that it got you kind of in that post-merge in a really positive way. Just some other moments that I'll throw out there. Chris throwing the challenge, I think, speaks to a lot of the main kind of Chris character. And it's definitely
right to get rid of Ren.
Yeah, throwing the challenge, but in a really like obvious way, where everyone could kind of tell he was doing that. And then I have Lee and Chris fighting kind of at that merge vote. I think speaks to a lot of the drama and kind of like Lee's rhetoric that I'm sure Peridiam would have really enjoyed had he watched it, through the season. Also with that like high key morality, which Peridiam, if that's something you don't enjoy, it's a big part of the season, but in a way that is satisfying because it doesn't really play out. But like that morality of like, wait, we're voting people, you're lying to people. Huge part of the season. So a lot of that is in that, but it's also, I think, in the Tanuke vote of the way that Matt plays the game and flips that on its head. And then obviously Matt wins, so that kind of rhetoric is flipped on its head. So that is very positive, I think.
And that was the big question, right? Is that Christopher was this big character. There was certainly some arguments at the time of like, well, he had more to fight against. His back was pretty much against the wall. He lost his closest ally second vote after the merge, then is pretty much voted at nearly every tribal council where he's not immune. But Matt, who plays much more of an understated game just by comparison, and also due to the fact that he's never targeted, is able to prevail because he's able to express his positioning, and also I think helps win out over the fact that he's obviously a bit more of a fan as well, so he knows a bit more of how to express yourself at a final tribal council. Maybe over someone like Chris.
He wasn't a fan, actually.
He wasn't a fan? I thought he was.
No, he wasn't, but he is now a fan. I think with Matt, like Matt played, I love Matt's game. Matt, like I had no notes. If you listen to his deep dive, I'm even more impressed. Like I thought it was so well positioned. It was well thought out. It was one of the best games I've ever seen from a very young person. There are really great games from very young people as well. Todd comes to mind. Marianne was young, but I love Matt's game. I think it's really methodical. I think he learned the game. Like his game is kind of synonymous with how we were watching it evolve. We were watching him evolve with it and learn it on the fly. In a way that the strategic game does win out. Yes, over a more bombastic game in Chris's, but it is strategy that wins and does turn this whole kind of morality rhetoric on its head. The move does that, the win does that. So I think it speaks to the tenor that vote does. And then I think like if you want to talk about some of the main characters, like a Matt, Tanuke, a Doug, you might talk about like them volunteering in the swap when they had to volunteer to go, which I think is when the season really kicks into high gear. I also think you could maybe talk about Little Fishgate, which was like a outpost style twist that followed them around with the lie around getting an idol versus getting fish. But these are just moments. I don't think it's defining the way the Tanuke vote is. So I think that's pretty definitive. But there was a lot there. It was a fun season.
Yeah, definitely recommend that people check it out. Again, it starts a little slow, but it's very fun, especially in 2023, to watch people kind of learn how to play Survivor. Again, we're kind of missing on that, especially in US, with them really casting people that know the show. So the UK had Survivor on briefly, but it went away for a long time. So it basically was sort of a refresh of the show for the people on that island, on a very different island. And so especially the way it heats up, I very much recommend.
Eventually it had idols. Eventually there were idols on the island. Not at the start, but through it. So
were there any, I was gonna ask, are there any cheeky Britishisms that you guys picked up along the way watching it, or was there anything culturally related? Because I feel like when I watch Australian Survivor or South African Survivor, there's a lot of things that I don't fully understand, like the culture. I mean, most of it I do, but there's some funny little.
We found out that them being like all high and mighty about not scheming on reality shows was pretty British, actually.
Oh,
so
very.
That was something.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the only other thing was like, I don't think like South Africa and Australia both do a lot of like local cuisines as rewards.
They did,
like,
though.
Dude, the Cook
in
sisters.
The auction, they had like a high tea.
That's the one I was thinking. I was like, I'm trying to remember because they have a braai in South Africa, or they have avocado toast in Australia as a reward.
You guys don't have avocado toast. Is that very Australian?
No, we do.
So, we can, but we have to give up our housing privileges.
It costs a lot.
It's expensive here too. Okay, it is, but the avocado toast is probably a big part of the culture. But yeah, in the UK at the auction, they had like a kind of high tea thing. They had tea on the island.
Did they have tea? Did they get tea as a reward?
They did. They did tea in the auction. I thought that was great.
They get crumpets?
Yeah, they did like that whole scones, I think great. It was. It was
I think it was scones.
Did they say scones or scones? How did they say it? Do you know?
I say scone. What do you say, scone?
I'd say scone.
What do you
Mike, you say scone, right?
I say scone as well, but you are much more connected, Peridiam, to Europe than I am.
I mean, so like my wife is English. I want to bring that up. We haven't watched the UK one, but I've wanted to just for that reason.
Do
just because
it.
cheekily like embarrassed on her behalf for what happens because she's just like, my people, this is pathetic.
At first, maybe, but then I think again, like the move, like the win, then it gets turned on its head and we play the game and then we reward it. So,
and I'm not surprised to hear the
whole
morality. I mean, it sort of comes into play with all new game shows. People show up and they're like, poo-pooing people playing the game. It's going to come up quite
it's
often
not
in
new.
Australian Survivor. It's not a new
Yeah, that's
concept at
It's
all.
a big part. We're going to talk
but
about
it's
that's going to be a
annoying.
great segue to where we're going now.
Right. A great segue is talking about the
Yeah.
morality that comes into Survivor, and where it's completely devoid, well, not completely, but pretty devoid of it in US Survivor at this point, 46 seasons deep. But then we look at, say, Australian Survivor, season 1 particularly, if we want to jump into that now. And
which
Yeah,
we're using,
well-
we're saying, with no offense to the 2 seasons that came prior, we're using this 2016 as season 1 here.
Well, I do it by years anyway, but yes, if
I
we're
do
gonna
use it by years as well. I remember the Australian season mostly by the year they came out more than
I
the
do
name.
completely, because it's so confusing to do which season, and then people
I
just,
know.
define it differently. So I do it by years, and it's a great segue. Those two are very connected. UK Survivor and AU 2016 are very much connected by mateship, well, especially Australian mateship, morality, who should lie, who's allowed to do what to who's a snake for doing who to what. And look, there's 2 moments here, and the only reason I have it yellow is because they're technically different, even though they happen in the same episode. But Christie's win is so memorable and so episodic in that it literally happens just in the finale. It reminds me of something recently in Claim to Fame that I was comparing it to, but really just comes up at the end there.
Yeah, a little bit of a similar ending there.
Yeah, and but it was so impressive. But Christie's a little bit of a ridiculous character. Christie has one of the best final tribal councils of all time, possibly the best. But then she also has, and is that the defining moment? Or is it her standing up at the iconic Hand on a Heart Idol, incredible finale, the waves are crashing up, and Christie winning that, crying there with Lee as their families watch? It's so defining to what Australian Survivor would become with these, torture challenges, these torture endurance challenges. It's so defining to the history that they would have that reverence to have the initial final endurance challenge as their final endurance challenge for their first season. Yeah. And it's Christie's win. So those are the 2 for me. We can talk about some other moments, but I don't know which one to do.
Speaking of last second moments, we can also talk about Nick tearing Lee to shreds.
So that's the thing is where I go back and forth, because again, I was between those 2 as well. This might be one of the greatest finales in Survivor history, just in terms of how epic it is. It really is for me memorability versus representation, where memorability, again, season 2 opens with that monologue that Christie gives, right? Lee, you would be making a 9-year-old girl the happiest person in the world, as she is trembling and shaking. The fact that we thought she was this goat, and then she of all people wins the final immunity challenge. But what unfortunately drags down 2016, despite the fact that it has an absolutely killer pre-merge, in my opinion, which is the first half of the game, which is 12 episodes, is the fact that the back half is largely dictated by not only a few people, but again, this mateship, this thing of you're not allowed to lie or betray anybody, and if you do, you're a snake, and we're going to get rid of you immediately, Nick Iadanza. And then to have that all get turned on Lee, right? That it's so thematically appropriate that the guy that hoisted himself up upon this game, when he is called out for maybe betraying those credos, ends up suffering because of it, and arguably loses out on the money right there because of it, that he's not able to own up to his game. So even though the win itself feels like just a moment there and what it represents for Christie's journey, I think the fall of Lee, if I'm sort of coupling it there alongside a sidecar, really harkens to what an entire back half of the season is about.
Yeah. And I do think that Christie at the final tribal council speaks more to Lee's loss, where he's going to lose it there for those mateship reasons, whereas the challenge is more just Christie's win, without some of the mateship overtones that we get obviously through the final tribal council. So that is convincing me, but I also just think the image of Christie there, it is her win, but it's also the season. It's just such an iconic moment, and it's so important to the structure of the future of Australian Survivor. So that has me between the 2. Peridiam, where would you go between the 2, or do you have other moments that you thought of?
I mean, I walked in thinking about Christie first, even though I recognize that
so did the jury.
Exactly.
Well, they actually did it. That's why it was so impressive.
Right. So it's majority of this season is really not focused on Christie, centered on Christie whatsoever. She's just kind of an afterthought for much of the narrative. For 25 episodes, she's there, but she's always
so many episodes.
Oh my god!
Two.
I mean, that's not even including the finale.
It's they're long episodes.
Finale's episodes 26. It's a lot, and it's tough for me to say it's Christie is defining this season, her moment where she caps it off. but I also think there is some sort of this like artistic vision where Mike says, does it represent it? But it's also like Christy kind of shatters the first 25 episodes and kicks Australian Survivor into this like representing more of the strategy of her game by getting the jury to actually reward that, in spite of the fact that the narrative for much of the season is not really around that, especially in the latter half with this jury. You know, Nick is the I think he's the first juror on the show, and he represents it, and it caps it off with a winner who is also very strategic, but you don't see that very often. And then she's able to articulate that really well compared to Lee, who operates more from the moral ambiguity of how he's playing the show, and then it can't be explained very well, and it doesn't come across very well, and you realize it's not a good strategy. It doesn't work well, and it's something that we don't see much going forward in Survivor overall. It doesn't encapsulate really any other season to this degree, at least. And a part of me wants to look at it like from that perspective and say like Christy deserves it. The other part of me says like Nick and the whole Lee of it all at the end really does. I love that, but I can't say that. It's tough because the imagery, it's so Christy. It's like Christy on the final the hands on a heart idol, begging Lee to give it to her.
I mean, you could argue, like it's a so game changer. It's the reason why they have amped up the torture porn and had to create these big spectacles for final 3 challenges is because of what Lee and Christy were doing.
And I feel like almost when I look at Survivor as a whole, I feel like the Christy on the hands on the heart idol with Lee there, and the crashing waves and the epic moment, and her begging for this and referencing her little fandom from when she was a kid. It's like that kind of encapsulates Survivor in so many ways. And it really kicks off. I find it one of the best moments in the history of Survivor, even though it comes from a season that like doesn't, I feel like necessarily fully deserve it, but it does.
Right. If you watch it in isolation, people will be like, wow, that's epic. So she must be a huge character going to the finale, right? It's like, well, there was one time when she voted out Phoebe because she found out that
Which I was
Phoebe
also very impressed. I didn't like that. I was like, no, not
right
Phoebe.
after she was actually meant to be voted out.
Yeah.
And then there was a twist. So I think that, look, it's the best part of the season. So that's good from a defining moment perspective. And I also think, like, look, I think we did Underwood putting himself into fire, right? And he literally wasn't there. Chrissy at least was there. Right? She was surviving on that island for 400 days. So I do think it's very fair. But I think within Christy, we're looking at challenge, her at Final Tribal Council, Nick specifically, his jury speech, or Christy beats Lee as a defining moment. I think we should pass that out. Just in some other moments, because it's going to be Christy related, but just other things that I threw out there. Nick and Connor going to Sue's big move. Nick and Connor going to the other tribe.
Right, that was the first big twist. But we're also like, wait a minute, is this fair? Like, this is creating great TV, but
it was not.
But imagine if they did it. Imagine when Nick would have gone out in the first, I think, episode 4, and none of us would be here talking about this. I know I certainly wouldn't be. So, so that was a big one. It definitely laid out the structure of what Australian Survivor would throw at us coming up. Phoebe's idol play, where Craig says, "Bitch stole my idol." The blind side of Brooke that the whole merge led up to, when this morality had to vote in on themselves and they had to make a move, but they were allowed to. That's the difference. They're allowed to because of a special secret thing. And no one else is allowed to because that's just how the world works. So the Brooke blindside. And then I also had like the super tribe picking their people. It was what was Nick's tribe? What was the blue tribe?
Sanapu.
Sanapu, yeah.
And then I think it was like Vavau was the yellow one.
Vavau and Aganoa, yeah. So Sanapu won one challenge, and the reward, maybe one of the most overpowered rewards in history, was we're gonna go to 2 tribes and you get to choose who you want. And they stacked the Monstars from Space Jam and they never lost again. And then they just went on to just pagong people at the merge, and it was so tedious until Brooke got blindsided, until we got to the real pointy end of 7 people where Brooke could go. Just some moments in there, but I think I don't know where to go with the Christy moments.
I think
I'm on the challenge still.
I will go to the challenge. If you're saying like we have to first down that final tribal council into one moment, then I will go to the challenge. I think
it is the challenge.
There's also the representation as well of like Lee crumbling under his own weight while Chrissy ends up surprisingly standing tall and winning the challenge despite the threats around her. That's basically what happens in half an hour.
Yeah, it's just like it's just more physical than it is like losing for all of the like strategic and social things that Lee had put in place, which will come home to roost in Final Tribal Council, and that does speak to that. Are you saying you would pick Final Tribal Council over the challenge, but if you have to pick one Final Tribal Council moment, you think the one challenge moment beats those individual moments, even though the like cumulative Final Tribal Council moments would beat the challenge, Mike? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. For me, it would rank overall Tribal Council, challenge, and then all of those individual moments that
but
you're
they
talking
add up.
about.
I think I'm happy to go with the challenge. What do you think, Peridiam?
Yeah, I think the challenge fits. I'm good with that. That was kind of my first one anyway, so.
Yeah, okay, great. That's what we get to. How satisfying that these are all going so well. Even the melted chocolate one, I think that was great too. Okay, Australian Survivor 2017. Really
Ooh,
fun season. One of my favorites.
This is a tough one because it's a really standout season. It's one of the best seasons of Survivor out there. And it's largely because of like a big ensemble cast, where unlike maybe modern era Australian Survivor, especially a lot of the big players end up going mid-merge. So my picks end up probably focusing around that. The two, namely, I had in mind were either the Henry boot or the Tessa boot.
Yeah.
So
I picked the Tessa boot. My just the 3-2-2 vote, where it involves so many of the biggest names, the storylines, the Champagne Alliance, the backstabbery of it all, the absolute. It's like the wildest vote ever. How do you 3-2-2-2?
Not on purpose as well.
Yeah. Right. And
no,
it
was all voting blocks, right? It was that
it involves the winner splitting it with the biggest character of the season with Luke and going big game hunting. Tessa is this little plucky, likable underdog who gets just taken out, and it's also not a great move for the people who commit the three of them.
Yeah,
specifically leaving Michelle out, which she'll then immediately turn on Sarah the next vote.
Yeah, I just feel like for me, there's a lot to the season. I did consider, you could talk about Cookiegate. That's a fun one with the winner.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because that
Cookiegate, but the Cookie Monster of it all.
The cookies. I mean, look. So many cookies on Australian Survivor.
A lot of cookies. That's true. And I don't know if that's fair to define it. I feel like the 3-2-2-2 is so unique that for me, it stood out. I was like, I think this is it. There's a lot. This is another one where it's like, this is such a high quality scene. There's so much going on at any point. But yeah, even the vote flip at the final four, I think it was where Jericho flips Tara and ties it up. That was a fantastic moment where I thought it was over.
Although I don't think we can have a moment where Luke and like a lot of these big players like Sarah.
It's impossible. I'm like, what am I doing? No, it's not the pre-merge. It's the post-merge in this season for sure. I don't know.
And I think the pre-merge is also great. It's a great season.
It's great. Well, the thing about Australia, the thing about 2017 that's so great is that it really felt like a season of just power swings, not even back and forth, just in multiple directions. And I feel like that's so well represented here, where you had, the Champagne Alliance come over the top last time, and you have, the alliance of Henry, who had joined Lockie's group, basically gets blindsided with an idol in his pocket. And so you think, okay, the building's been reshaped. This is how the dynamics are going to be moving forward. But then it immediately splinters apart when the Champagne Alliance breaks apart and they say, okay, no, we're going to vote out Tessa next. To me, it just really represents how truly nobody was safe in Australian Survivor 2017. Just when you thought you had constructed something that proved to be stable, it ends up being basically made of spaghetti and fractures apart at the next vote.
Cookie dough, I think is what we would say. Yeah, I mean, like the 3-2-2-2. They learned it was a bad move when you vote 3 out of 9 people come back with 3 of 8, and yes, you won the vote, but actually you pissed off the majority.
You won the battle, and lost the war.
Yeah, and 2 people are going to go back to back, but Jericho wins. Look, the 3-2-2-2, I love. It's super fun. I didn't have it in my top column. I had the Henry blindside, which I do think speaks to all of these big characters. Pulling off Henry is such a huge character. Him going down like that, and the way that it was raining, they're all in the shelter, just the way they were whispering to each other, like mouthing it to each other without being able to talk about it, to pull off one of the most impressive blindsides of a huge player with an idol. It's probably the moment to me. I then also thought, like, Jericho sharing his cookies. That's a big part of the winner journey. Like Jericho and Luke on the beach at night, being sneaky with the cookies, I think speaks to that whole dynamic, which is so important, the winner's journey, and I think the fun tone. I think I'd still lean Henry's blindside here. The 3-2-2-2 is in there for me. Just a couple of other ones. There's so much, again, in these very long seasons, but Tara getting sent to the other tribe by AK, which will then, actually, he voted her out. She went to the other tribe. Then they swapped. AK loses for that. I think that speaks to the nature.
Do you have the chicken idol on there?
I have chicken idol. And the chicken idol, it's not the defining moment, but I will say, after Australian Survivor 2016, I was like, I'm gonna like kind of watch. Like that was that was a really bad season. I feel like it embarrassed me with the Australians in terms of Survivor. I feel like I felt embarrassed by Australia to the Survivor people. It was both things. And then I was like, let's see how it goes. First episode with the Joe and Ken stuff, I was like, all right. And then episode 2 with the chicken idol, it's so crazy off the bat. I remember being like, oh, we're on now. And it's so good. And I think like even from episode 5, I have that here in the Flip on Amy, where this like Summertale 5 come together, is so good so early. And it's like 5 episodes in, and we still have 21 episodes to go. So I have that here as well.
We get Tarzan playing the idol to sacrifice himself in episode 4.
That's episode 4.
Though not realizing that he sacrificed himself, being like, I'm gonna go save Tessa, and everyone's like, oh, Tarzan said he was gonna play the idol on Tessa. We should probably vote out Tarzan.
Whoops.
That's probably the mateship kind of connection we can make, and then it's gone in episode 4, and then we really are playing the game.
Much
I mean, you could argue Henry throwing the challenge to also get rid of Sam and Mark as well, which ends up obviously playing a huge role a few years down the line
of the show. Yeah.
Speaking of Henry, you could do him volunteering to swap, which dooms his allies because they're left without a majority. I think that probably speaks to Henry, but maybe that is summed up in the Henry blindside when we have that huge character of Henry. I already talked about Tara and Annalise with her getting sent to the other tribe, but I'm sorry, Annalise. I know it was a big quote. They didn't have time to talk about what the second vote would be, so loudly innovated to just yell it, and then everyone knew who they were voting for. So there could be even more. There's so many, but I think
it's
for
a
me,
top tier season.
A Henry blindside. Top 3 ever, are you saying?
I was saying top tier. Top tier.
Oh, top tier. I thought you said top 3. And I was like,
maybe.
There's a lot of good seasons. It's an incredible
There's so many good
season.
seasons. I don't know. Maybe.
It's one of the best newbie seasons of Survivor ever.
I agree. And I think, the Henry blindside for me incorporates all these main characters in a really big way, and the fun and the strategy, but like just how enjoyable it was. So that's my vote. The Henry blindside.
Yep. What do you think? I was going to say 3-2-2-2 still. I just love it. It's for me, it's always been just.
Do I hate plurality votes? Do I hate myself?
Plurality votes?
Well, why am I not voting for the 3-2-2-2? What a horrible person I am.
I think we make this plurality a majority. I will also vote for 3.
Oh, wow.
This means that one of us isn't going to win the season, Mike, because Shannon's about to get revenge on us.
It hasn't been back from the past 7 years, Peridiam. It's never happening.
You really you thinking 3-2-2-2? We're going with that.
I do think so. I mean, I have to rewatch it. I know the Henry one's great. It's back. There's episodes back to back, and it's like speaks to what's so great about this season is that like there's just. I don't know. I could say it's a runner up, and I did think about it, but I've referenced the 3-2-2 so much that it's impossible for me. So that's my
and I think to me it almost represents in the way that the rock draw represents South Africa Philippines of like there was a 3-2-2-2 vote at the final 9. That's all you need to know about why to watch 2017.
Yeah, it's so good. I could also say Luke going. He's such a big character, but I think we're going to talk about that a little later.
It's
not a good segue because there's one in between. But let's talk about Champions versus Contenders 1, which I actually have in green here. There's a lot of things here that are all connected to one thing, which is 3 main characters for me. It's Sean's loss because Matt Rogers doesn't vote for her, and the reason it happens for me is because Sean gets up to play her idol on Matt Rogers, and Benji says, no, don't do that, play it for yourself. She does. Matt Rogers goes home and then is so bitter about it that he doesn't vote for her, so she loses 4-5 against Shane. Now, you could have a lot of moments in that. You can have the moment of Benji telling Sean to play the idol, and I do, because I think that incorporates all of that, and I think it's also an image in my mind that, again, I could draw for you right now. Badly, but I could. But then I think you could also have Sean taking Shane, which I think is a part of that. I think you could have
and Brian immediately telling her she made a mistake.
And he was right. I think you could have Matt Rogers' actual jury vote, but I think all of that plays into that moment, and it's the most iconic, and it's the biggest moment of the season.
Oh yeah,
so that's what it is for me.
This was an easy one, I think.
This was an easy one, yeah, because I think, with no offense to the great Shane Gould, this season was defined by Sean losing,
and another one will be too.
Yeah, exactly, and so I do. Yeah, and so I do think that it was also almost like we were talking about with Tessa and a couple of these other players. Matt Rogers, he was the godfather, right? He was perceived as the guy that was leading the charge. He makes one of his first mistakes when he ends up taking out Sam in the previous vote, and this was also like seen as a big overthrow. The Contenders had really just been bleeding as much as their red buffs were since the beginning, and especially in the pre-merge. They were all getting picked off in the post-merge as well, and so this was the first opportunity that kind of being led by Benji, but Shanella alongside him were able to flip Brian and Monica to vote out Matt with an idol in his pocket.
Yeah, there's so much there. Like we talk about like Henry, a big character with an idol in his pocket. That's gonna be Matt Rogers. We talk about these big, I think it was final 9 flips and blindsides. That's his vote too, and it has that moment with Benji. There's so much there.
Yep. Yeah, I was gonna say this is a pretty for me, this was an easy one, especially this is where actually I sort of fell off Australian Survivor with the pre-merge of this season, because I was like, there's really not much going on.
But
it's
they
so bland.
That's, and I remember actually
Yeah.
Jonathan saying in the next time on after the last pre-merge episode, like, and one of the best post-merges in Survivor history.
Stay tuned.
You just have to sit through more than a whole US season, which is bad. But the second half, which is also more than a whole US season, is great. So
right, that's the duality of Australian Survivor. The first half, it's like, the second half, it's like, whoa.
Of a skosh of like, you know, raging misogyny and Tegan getting voted out like 5 times.
Yeah, that's the thing with Australian Survivor. It's never medium. It's because it's so much. It's either really, really bad, I think, or really, really good. And even the medium season, which for me is this, is because it's only medium because we're evening out really, really bad and really, really good, completely delineated right in the center.
In other words, what is in a US Survivor? This would be like one season not good, then the next year it's the same cycle, and it's an incredible season, and you're just like, holy
smush
smoke.
It together.
Right, but they smushed it together, or stitched it together like a Frankenstein's monster, and just like, you get this season. That's what it is. So,
but I do think, like, we talk about bad pre-mergers and great post-mergers. I think, like, UK we just talked about. I think 46 probably falls into that as well, where it's like, really just a jump. I mean, the only other moment,
maybe on a rewatch, but
Champions vs Contenders actually got off to a pretty hot start, though. Like, remember Matt Dyson, like, seemingly talks himself into getting eliminated. You have Russell getting blindsided with ice around his neck.
I jokingly put that in, but I also jokingly put in melted chocolate. I did put in Russell going home with an idol around his neck.
I mean,
just put it as an honorable mention, but it doesn't define it because it's in episode 2, and then he's not in the next 22 episodes.
I mean, we've seen this already. We saw this on season 22. We saw Russell go out early. It wasn't. I mean, for me, that was the moment.
The reunion and leave his hat behind.
Did he get banned from a country? Which is true in my mind.
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure we banned him, right?
And just like the storyline of watching Russell lose and go out early is already been done, so it doesn't define the season at all. But
no, it really doesn't. But
it doesn't feel like an authentic Survivor franchise until Russell appears and loses the game. So it really felt like a nice christening of Survivor AU.
Certified it. Okay, well, now we can really segue into what might be the defining moment of Luke losing in Champions vs Contenders 2, Australian Survivor 2019. I'm yellow on this because I do think Luke going home is an option.
I did think about that. That was
I
up there.
Have so many here. I have, like, Australian Survivor is so long. Can I just throw out some of the moments and you?
Yes, please. I'm going to estimate that like
the final 5,
70% of them are going to involve the names David or Henry, or Harry, I should say,
and Luke.
And Luke.
David, Harry, and Luke.
3.
I think with David, I mean, David literally has a winning season, and he is defining that, and we will talk about it, but he's so defining in 2019. Like, this is when he emerged as one of the biggest global characters in Survivor history. For me, the main moment that I have is David eating the popcorn. The image
I put that too.
Is so clear. It speaks to David's fun. Obviously that reward has Luke crying while eating the ice cream as well. There's a lot going on, but finding the idol and then eating the popcorn, I think it's defining in that it's David, it's defining that it's fun, and it's also just such a big, memorable moment. The reason I don't have this certified is that I do think Luke going home spurred a GoFundMe campaign where he got more than the winning amount of money, and then it had to be stopped. So it's such a big moment where Luke goes home at the final 4. I think the sadness of that probably doesn't speak to the tone of the season, but
I don't think it does
I think it speaks to Luke. And then just to throw out some others, and we can talk about, because I have so many. David and Sean swapping the idol in the really fun twist where they each get each other's idol. David makes a fake idol for Sean, and they swap that. I have I wanted one with Pia, who's also like a great winner in her own right.
Which is tough with Australian Survivor, where it's like sometimes because it's much more of a marathon than a sprint, we don't more often we have, but we don't often get these winners like having moments of peaking throughout the season.
Her first confessional. That's what I always remember about Pia. Her first in episode 1, her last confessional before she goes to tribal council,
where she says, "I'm either gonna be first out or I'm gonna win."
Yeah, and my wife looked at me and says, "Like, she's gonna win, isn't she?" And it was just like 25 episodes of like, "So when is she's the winner? She's the winner." I was like,
"Well, it wasn't just that confessional. They also had her as the
other
interview on
times
the project before the season started. She did the interview on the project, and to this day, I'll never. And then they also did it with David the next season. Let's not even talk about that being spoiled in just the media. No, but I do think if you're gonna have a Pia moment that also involves Luke, David, Janine, and then they pull over Ross and Abby. It's early on, but them, the fun people pulling over the most fun people in the Sporty Seven to make like a dream alliance. And then Luke has a very iconic confessional where he says, "Good luck on your next swim. Back to Australia." I had to be reminded that that person's name was Susie, but I can still quote that confessional verbatim. So I think that spoke to the fun we were going to have and the strategy with some big characters there and Pia, as well as a winner. Because I do think otherwise for Pia, it's a very consistent, well-narrated journey. But is there one specific moment? I didn't personally have one, so I just kind of wanted to put that in there. Harry making up a child. David and Luke with their kind of double idol play probably speaks to that duo. Andy leaving and saying Dave has an idol. I don't know if it's defining, but it's certainly memorable.
It's defining for you to create the concept of trapdoors.
Yeah, it was the kind of the trapdoor initiating moment. And then Abby flipping on, it was Simon. It was a murky vote. I remember they didn't even show the votes because they had to conceal like the real strategy that they'd like manufactured in the edit. But basically the basic premise is that like big characters, Luke, Harry, Baden, flip Abby over, and she kind of leaves her alliance with primarily Pia and Janine to kind of, it's not the winning game because Pia loses in this vote, but it was a really, really big structural flip to flip Abby over. And that's what I had, and I probably could have had more, and there's a lot going on in that season.
Maybe I'll throw out a bit of a dark horse candidate here. I don't think it's the most memorable. Gut check, I would probably go with Luke's vote out. I agree that this is an incredibly entertaining season. But the fact is, this is the first guy to come in as a returnee in Australian Survivor and plays alongside this incredibly chaotic champions tribe. It's the exact opposite of what happened last season, where the contenders are somehow this like very cohesive block and they dominate the pre-swap, and the champions are just absolutely falling apart. But then Luke becomes sort of like the odds-on threat, and he just keeps winning immunity challenges. Even though there are all these voting blocks that kind of all congealed around, okay, Luke has to go. And it culminates in, like, honestly, the biggest funeral for a Survivor player I have ever seen, where, like, they do not give any suspense. They show every single vote, where Pia's even crying because she's like, I can't even give you a sympathy vote.
But that's a big Pia moment as well, I will say, because she got a lot of hate for voting out someone on Survivor so she could win the game she'd also played. So that's a Pia moment.
Yeah.
The only one that I would bring up that I think is much more down the list, but the more I think about it, does kind of represent the chaos that this season was actually the vote before, where perhaps in the best move he ever pulled off, Luke has basically what's known as like the tribal council pass, safety without power, etc., where he ends up playing it on Baden and then basically starts this like live tribal council and is able to work together.
2-1-1.
Yeah, work together with Pia.
2-1-1.
Yeah, exactly. Where the two of them who had basically been on opposite sides ever since, Simon ends up losing and Janine ends up getting voted out. They worked together, though, to get out somebody like Abby, who was definitely controversial at the time because it was like, Luke, do you want to get rid of someone who could be a challenge threat, considering that, like, that's going to be another shield for you? But it does represent just sort of the big hold that Luke had over that endgame stretch, includes some strategy as well, and does have some Pia, too.
Also, Sam, 0 confessionals.
Defining moment.
That speaks to the editing, which I do think was, like, probably the extremes of what we talk about of Australian Survivor editing, which is like side characters are not even, really. And the main characters, and look at the main characters.
It kicks off here.
Also, especially in Champions versus Contenders. Remember when they cast someone who was like a survivor of the tsunami, and they had her jump into water from a precipitous height?
Challenge. They had multiple drowning challenges.
Reality TV.
I don't know. That's defining. I think that for me, it's still David. Like, I still think you come away with so many. Like,
I'm just gonna say right now, for me it was it's David. And I wrote David on the popcorn question mark because I'm like, is this an absurd answer that nobody's gonna look? Is gonna look at me sideways? But for me, this season is just I've watched that scene like 10 times, and it's just the nom, and he's crying. He's looking up like, oh, I love you, babe. He's finding the idol. And
well, I don't think he was looking up. I think more Luke was like my family, and I think David was like my idol and my popcorn.
Yeah, he was the one that was trying to hork it down like some sort of
It's just too good. It's one of the funniest scenes in the history of Survivor.
I completely agree. I really do think it's one of the
and he's like the main character from up until his boot, and he's just such a dominating force. And this is 16 episodes out of 24.
Yeah,
he's in the
and
game.
he's going to be important going forward.
Another guy gets voted out with an idol in his pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah, there
Like,
you go. These
speaking
big
to, like,
characters getting voted out the early merge with idols in their pockets.
yeah, I mean, Mike, would you have voted for that? I mean, you're outvoted anyway, but what would you?
No,
What
I
would
wouldn't have.
you would have
I
done,
probably
Luke?
I would have done another Luke, or if there
Mm.
was enough people on board with my
I
own
get Luke
2-1-1
with the
plan.
3-2-2-2. He got the 3-2-2-2. That was his crowning achievement. Luke losing for me doesn't define
We
what
got
this season
Steffi
is.
twice. We could double tap people.
Well,
Eh,
yeah, Luke.
not intended. I didn't mean for that to happen.
I think we might get David twice, which we'll talk about. But I do think,
Yeah, well,
look, Luke, it's a huge
we
moment,
will.
but I
We'll
just
get
think
David twice.
the sadness really doesn't define the tenor of the season. It's really, really sad, and the rest of the season is so fun. I just think
I
that
think most of the
should we-
season is ridiculous.
Well,
It's
that's
just
what-
over the top, and
I would say more so it's a tenor for the next season that comes along in terms of sadness and nobody
Yeah.
having fun there.
yeah, it'd be fun. Well, and we can segue on David because as well, I think that if David had never played again, he could still define the season and he would still
Mhm.
have that big moment. But considering that he's also going to go on to play and then spoiler win the next season, like this is David. He was introduced here and it was like only the start really of what was to come. So I think it's very
yeah,
defining. for a
popcorn origin
franchise.
story lives on forever, and then he
I
comes
mean,
back
yeah.
fueled by the popcorn.
Talk about
and he
popcorn.
Absolutely dominates, like top to bottom. It's just, and I'm like, I almost think that his vote against was it the Daisy blindside that?
Yeah.
So that would be my pick. Honestly, would be
That was my pick too.
The first tribal council. Not the Jericho ended up going in and voted out in the first one, but where he because
It's
coming
Jericho
in,
and then
It just sets the tenor for the whole season.
but I think a lot of us
Shane
were
Jericho,
like,
sorry.
they had just not only that, the people because they started filming in the middle of season 4 airing, so they had just basically seen all the shenanigans.
You remember
that
what
able to pull off.
happened? You would because it happened to me. This is a fun behind the scenes story. I was just remembering. I would have told you about it at the time, but like you talk about it being in the middle of the 2019 season. So Daisy got voted out in the 2019 season, like a week after they'd gone out to film All Stars, and she went to exile against Simon Black.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and I knew that I had an X interview the next day, so I knew that Simon Black would lose at Exile Island because they'd just gone out to film All Stars. I've never been so anti-spoiled by some of the behind-the-scenes stuff because no, Daisy lost at Exile, and I did have an exit interview with her because she'd been voted out a couple of days prior in the
Mhm.
3rd episode of the season, and I remember being like, "What a week, Daisy!" Like knowing that and I remember being like, "Oh, so you went home like twice this week." You know, with the vote and with Exile, but what I really
Right,
meant
on the
was on
episode.
TV and in life. I can't believe they gave me that exit interview.
I mean, that is wild that it's like, hey, Daisy, you just got voted out of your second season. Can you just really quick go sit down for 15 minutes and talk about your first season when you were voted out?
Wow, she got voted out so quickly. She can actually make her exit press. So, Daisy, can you just get into some polls here?
I mean, and little did she know, like this is going to define a lot of what that's going to happen going forward. I mean, she didn't know at the time, but like,
but that was the thing is that David was able to come in and say specifically. Now, granted, again, his reasoning can sometimes be a little suspect between this and Harry, I must beat your record of most consecutive days played in a Survivor season. But he had an axe to grind against her. And so he comes in with this agenda, takes advantage of the fact that, you know, with what's the tribe name? Vakama, I think there was this clear minority with Matt Rogers' group. David decides to play mole there and, you know, tips them off as to what to do. And if you talk about iconic images, for me, by far, most iconic image of All Stars is David's pretends to be shocked face, basically.
Yeah.
You can meme that now. I think there's so much in the moment. It's David's, it's hard to say best move because the whole game is so impressive and there's so many more weeks to come. But it definitely like the flashiest move, the most fun, to the point where I actually think it's too kind to All Stars to give such a the best moment, such a good moment for a season that was not that fun. This is very fun. But I do think that it brings in so many different people. You have what I really enjoy this Matt Rogers season where he has to be the underdog, going from Godfather to underdog. You have that, him working with David. You have the fact that Henry, in one of my favorite opening episode twists, found this, well, they both have a clue that they get as like the champions in the challenge to an idol that is at Tribal Council. Henry gets it, gives it to Matt. So Henry's a really big part of that as well. And then it's used here to take out Daisy. Brooke's a part of that as well in playing the idol on David, which is something that he kind of puts out there to make sure the idols get flushed. It is masterful. It's really, really fun. It's in episode 3 and it's all downhill from there.
That's the thing. Yeah. After that first week, I would say honestly though, the first, I'd say like 6 or so episodes, basically before the exile vote happens. And even with the exile vote, when it's like, okay, how can they take advantage of this? These top 2 go to exile. It's very fun. It's the Survivor All-Stars 20 years ago of oh, all these characters from the first 4 seasons are playing together. This is like fan fiction come to life. And then it was just a combination of a really bad swap where basically the two tribes stuck together for the rest of the season. And much like the other All-Stars, it was dominated in the post-merge by people that honestly the fans were least excited for. They were the ones that won out over the bigger fan favorite, larger characters who were taken out at the beginning of the merge. And it ends up getting dominated. And this time I would say the more dominant player does end up winning, perhaps as opposed to Survivor All-Stars OG. But yeah, maybe it's just perhaps more of a manifestation of like what All-Stars was in those first couple of weeks and how we want to crystallize and bottle that joy, especially at the day and time that it was taking place in.
Yeah, it's funny because it doesn't for me define the season, but it also is like what I would think of when I think of like the best moment on the season. It's the Daisy vote, and most of the season this is in the running for my least favorite Australian Survivor season. It's also one of my least favorite It's one of my least favorite Survivor seasons just because
Me too.
it was blatantly apparent I thought what was going to happen, and it happened. And I love David. I walked into this season absolutely adoring him from the previous year. He was one of my favorite characters. That popcorn scene got me rolling so hard. And watching him, if you told me he was going to come back and dominate, I would have been like, let's go. But because
like
of the editing, they leaned into it too hard. It was too indulgent. It was like I wanted a scoop of ice cream and they gave me the whole tub. And it was too I got sick to my stomach.
All the donuts in the world.
Yeah, that's really what. And every donut is a confessional. This is when I think it's also because up to this point, Australian Survivor, there was sort of like not a concrete plan to win, but it's usually like, hey, lay low for a while, maintain a good position. Eventually, all the big threats will take each other out, and then you'll get to the end and pull up a win. David was really the first of his kind, sort of followed up by people like Mark, like Haley, like Ferris, as like, oh, these big players are able to dominate from the beginning and somehow run a masterclass in this game from beginning to end. And so
that's somehow being a lot of players that nobody else wanted to see, just sort of being the pawns in their giant chessboard.
Yeah,
and helping them stay afloat with like, I'm like, man, Moana, what was she doing?
And then
Tarzan.
You could tell, and production's like, give us Exile Week, give us Trial by Fire, like anything.
Hey, Exile Week at least broke it up, okay?
Did we need Zach back? Was anybody clamoring for that? I don't know.
I think we wanted to bring back someone known fully for their misogyny. And I think I wanted to complain about that and then get hate from people who were, I guess, justifying the misogyny.
Yeah, it's fan fiction, but it's like, it's too soon, guys, too soon. Let it cook. Give them time to cook more. There's a little too much. And with the 24 player cast, it's like, I don't know if we need 24 back from seasons 1 through 4. I would have waited a couple years to do this because it really, but then again, it does kind of mirror US Survivor All-Stars a little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit.
They had like 96 players to pull from between those 4 seasons alone.
Yeah, but they had to pull 24, which is so many of the ones that they had.
So many.
I do think with David, it definitely was like little more, too much, take it back.
It was too much.
But like, I really enjoy David, but yeah, it was unfortunate that
I still like him. I don't hold it against David. It was just, for me, it was, I'm too conscious of the edit.
Do I have a show for you come next spring, coming to Peacock?
David,
do you? Okay.
He's on Dondi.
He is on Dondi season 2.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Which is really,
I haven't watched season 1, so I don't know. But
it's such a win for, Nina's on the Anonymous, so it's such a win for Australian Survivor, just making the kind of global rounds. But yeah, so if we're going to have that, the other ones that I did have, and I actually had this as yellow because I thought maybe it's too fun for what the season deserves, but I did have Sean not picking The Rock. For people who don't remember what happened, so there was this like minority alliance that were just like the underdogs fighting Brooke, AK, and Shawnee that I think a lot of people were rooting for. That in the Exile Week, which I think would be also a possible defining moment, although I guess it was actually like atonal.
It was that brief glimpse of hope of like, okay, they were able to flip Jackie, the underdog trio of Brooke, AK, and Shawnee. They were able to get out Zach, but then it immediately happens where it's the final 8. They're basically, Jackie is voting alongside them now as a 4. It's forced against the other 4. And basically they're trying to convince Sharn in the moment, like, please vote with us. And Sharn says, okay, if you get rid of Jackie now, I will vote with you at the next tribal council.
Yeah.
They go along with it. She doesn't.
Immediately reneges on that. And they're like, if you don't, we will never vote for you at the end. That's 3 jury votes and also Harry and Lockie on the jury. It was 5 of 9 jury votes. It made it an unwinnable game for her. To clarify, like, as well, what Rocks looked like. So they voted for Jackie. So it was like the 3 kind of like old, kind of young, fun group that they were against the people no one was rooting for. So so there was the three of them. And then Shan, because David was immune, he played the idol on Tarzan and Mo got vote. So she was the only one of that alliance who'd be picking a rock. She was even trying to get Tarzan to flip on Mo. Then when it gets to the unanimous vote, she pulls them across by pledging her loyalty to them. They're like, you will pay if you don't do it. And then she doesn't do it. And then she loses. So in the story of Shan's second loss, I think this is probably the story of that. And we've already defined that. Some of the other moments that I had, as I said, Exile Week actually is completely the opposite of actually the tone of the whole season. They had to manufacture a week-long, very convoluted twist where Shawnee uses her social charms to pull over Jackie, win on a plurality vote where they take it over the vote split to take out Zach. And then I have David winning just in and of itself. I think we could have that, but I do think that the Daisy vote obviously just shows the dominance in that. David finding the idol behind Phoebe's back, I think probably speaks to some of the less fun elements of David's dominance and just the way he was like running circles around people. It wasn't in amazing taste probably, as he was just like laughing as she's like really going through it. And then one that my brother suggested, which is interesting, Harry not giving Nick his advantage. Yeah, which would have paused the vote, which would have triggered a non-elim.
No,
and then
don't break my heart and remind me how that.
But you should. Your heart should be broken. Like if we're thinking about the tenor and the tone of the season, the frustration and the devastation, and like, oh no, and then Nick's gonna get voted out unanimously on a bad swap, and then we're just gonna march to the finish as I cling to the last spreads.
No, but like, sanity. But the frustration is not directed towards the players though, which I feel like is actually the timbre of the season. It's towards production for like, just answer the stupid effing question when somebody asks you, hey, if I play this, does it trigger a merge? You say yes.
Yeah. Harry didn't know, would it trigger a merge, which would be great. He'd be reunited with Nick, and then they'd have some more numbers, and possibly Nick could have pulled, possibly he thought maybe Shan or Lee over. Maybe it'd be a different game, maybe. Or would it not trigger a merge, and then maybe Harry would have to go back to a pre-merge tribal council where he might be in trouble, and that was a fair question to have, and it was so production-oriented and finicky that also, like, all the annoyance of that kind of speaks to, I feel it again. It's good to feel ways. But I do think, I'm still going back to Daisy, but I just wanted to throw out.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like, look, I think the Daisy thing for me is just an easy sell. This is regardless of how I feel about it all. This is the season of David, and the defining moment is David's face and the Daisy vote, and it's him making that crazy move, and it goes and it's a ripple effect. The whole season it's David. It's the David season. So I'm like, it defines it, even though it feels like another one of those like episode 2, episode 3 moments that defines the rest of the season. Yeah, kind of makes sense. I get it.
Yeah. So there's a lot in it. It's a lot of good. So we're all agreed, actually. Great.
Unanimous, much like a lot of the votes in the post-merge.
I have for this next season so many moments. Australian Survivor is so
good stuff
long.
Here. There's a lot of good stuff on this.
It's really tough because I think going back to the Philippines example, if we're talking about a moment that just represents so many of the questionable things that were happening, I've cooked it would be right there.
That's great. I was like,
which
was like the fourth one I thought of.
But
really,
I know there's a lot of other stuff.
This season is defined by arguably the best top 2 in Survivor history. It has to go through either a Haley moment, a George moment, or a moment that involves them both.
Okay, I'm gonna run out.
Hold on, let me just. Are you gonna go?
Give me what you have. Give me what you have.
I was just gonna say between it was either like George and Haley at the final 4, or possibly
2-1-1, Jeff.
Yeah, like that was incredible. They link up,
amazing,
or it could be the early post-merge where they sort of have this like the mole with the narrative with George
the merge vote.
And then all of a sudden
George
everything
is the mole,
just
Haley plays idol correctly.
It just goes upside down with the whole twist of it all, and Haley gets totally screwed over, and then George goes. It creates this wacky narrative that doesn't really feel like Survivor, and it kind of is one of my least favorite moments in the history of Australian Survivor. But it still puts the 2 main characters front and center with Haley and George of it. And then Haley just comes right back in one episode. And it just like that to me defines a lot of the season. It starts really right there where both of these main characters just collide. So I'm like, maybe that's the defining moment. It's really, for me, has to deal with Haley or George in some capacity.
Yeah. So this
the Simon vote, I know the Simon vote too is a huge moment too in the
but it's also tough because like there's so many different elements to grab here. There is the Haley, there's the George, there is the like messy the Haley and George, there's the messy gameplay of like, why are you doing this? How are you doing this? But then there's also the production element. Yeah. Of like the twistiest season ever, throwing in probably the most questionable twists we have seen. I still say that 1 vote twist is the worst one I have ever seen in Survivor history.
Terrible. It soured me so hard.
I think it's really tough to find one that's going to encompass everything.
Okay, you can't. I mean, this season could have two defining moments probably a week. I mean, it was never boring. For good or for bad, it was never boring. And I like to go to some of the production stuff seems unfair because that's so negative on a season that I do actually love. But the production stuff was extreme. I have a lot in my secondary column and only actually one in the first that I really feel is the moment. I'm going to go through them and then I'm going to end on the main one that I have. We've mentioned a couple, but yeah, the Baden vote, the one vote to take out Baden, we hate it, but it's a huge vote. The merge vote where Haley plays the idol and George is the mole. Haley scissors, paper, rock. George isn't involved, but man, what a move where she uses her idol to kind of cover everything and split Braun after a tricky swap. We've got the final four, 2-1-1, incredible vote, which is peak Haley and George. We've got Cara saying, I've cooked this, which isn't Haley there, but is the insanity of the season where Cara accidentally votes out Danny and George is also a part of that as well. We've got the episode 1 advantage as we're talking about production where George sends back to camp half the tribe and then Phil goes home, really set up what was going to happen from a production standpoint, how extreme it would be. And then we get seasons of like...
We don't want people voting.
Yeah, well, we get a lot of that. I would say we get seasons of a big episode 1 twist. We also do have that in All Stars, to be fair, from before that. We've got Haley flipping on Joey and saving George. Big Haley and George moment early. Simon going home with 2 idols doesn't speak to like that pair, but is a huge moment. And then, as we're saying, the episode where Haley gets voted out, Haley and George just arguing at the tribal council. I think probably speaks to a lot of that dynamic, but that's actually not what I've chosen. I have one more in the top column, and I think it's so good. Cara saving George, who would have actually not gone home, but actually would have just gone to the other tribe. But she became Macedonian Jesus. They finally voted out George. It's the way that George goes, Cara, and she goes, I'm a mom. In my mind, does she do that? Yeah, like Missy style. She's a mom. In my head, that's how it sounds. Then Cara just goes straight to Braun. She's Macedonian Jesus. She comes back from the dead. You could not script it. Huge George moment. Huge Cara moment. It's happening on Reigns with Haley there.
I can see it.
It's hard to encompass it all. And I think to do that, maybe you'd have to do the merge with Haley and George, or maybe the final four with Haley and George if you really want that duo. But I just think the moment of Cara becoming Macedonian Jesus is such a moment in and of itself, and that's my pick.
Yeah, and
a little bit of production shenanigans in that.
Exactly.
Thing of, you're voting someone out, but they find out after the fact that they got swapped over the tribe, but you don't know that.
And everyone was like, "What karma? Like for Cara?" This was just ridiculous. So
yeah, I would say for me, the final 4 vote would be a hefty second place as well. Because even if we want to pontificate upon the subplot of just Cara being one of the worst players in Survivor history, especially to make it to the near finale, like the fact that she decides to turn on her closest ally then and basically votes herself out of the game in the process is something that could be discussed. But yeah, you made a cogent argument there, Shannon. I'm happy to go with a bit of a dark horse here.
I agree. I'm like, that actually does fit a lot of the categories that I was trying to, check off. I was like, I know it doesn't have as much Haley in it, but still,
but she is
there.
Part of a plan trying to vote out George.
And like this really
and then she will go and save George immediately after.
It is the season of George in many ways, which of course we'll talk about again in 2 seasons. But this is like Haley is a little less of the main character than George is. George is really the pre-merge and the post-merge. Haley is more post-merge than pre-merge.
Well, she does have a lot.
She has some moments in the pre-merge too.
She on Joey. She does.
It's just when you compare it to George starting the premiere,
compared to George, anyone.
The whole pre-merge, it starts in the very beginning with George being this wacky out of left field. Like, what is this? Who is this guy? What is he doing? What is his deal? And then he's in the final 2 and he's like crushes. It's just, I agree. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe it is really more George than Haley at the end of the day. Cause I do think that it is more George, but it doesn't have to be fitting them both into the box. It really is more just, and I do think that fits well with the whole Cara lasting until the final 4. She goes deep. This is the beginning of that, where it's just like this crazy moment. And then she doesn't even get voted out. It's like, what?
Like everyone in the end game had been voted out pretty much and come back except George and like way to a degree, but she was.
And wasn't it twice for Cara because she had like the super secret idol the influencer idol that could be played on her.
That was George played on her. I think, but like actively getting voted out, not just like an idol, was like everyone in the end game. I don't want to diminish Haley. She's one of my favorite winners, players, and people in the world.
No, she's great.
And I think the first 2 weeks are quiet on Haley. I think she has a massive pre-merge. No one has as big of anything compared to George. I don't know if you want to take that out of context. It's not how I intended it. I think that she does so much, and I still think that there is something here in that she's part of the brains who are trying to take out George and then is immediately going to save him with Joey. So that dynamic is part of it, maybe quieter, but she is a part. But I just think it's such a big moment, and it's really hard to encompass all of this insane season in one moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, are you good on time, by the way?
Yeah. Let's keep
You're
going.
okay? All right,
Yeah, let's go. Let's go 3
She
more.
said with a nice ellipses at the end.
Yeah, we're good.
Cool.
It's fine.
Okay.
There's so much to talk about. Let's talk about blood versus water, which I think
All right.
I have in green, and I do think is a bit easier. Doesn't have as much
Yeah, I
fun
do.
stuff
I think
here.
it's another quick one.
Should we talk about it's not another vote where someone gets voted out with an idol in their pocket, and actually that's the
No,
controversy,
not their
right?
pocket.
Is that the idol gets given to somebody else, the Jesse boot.
Yes.
Yeah, the Jesse
Sam
of it all.
stealing Jesse's idol reverberated in many ways. I think it does speak to the winner's journey because it was Sam and Mark, and it's a big part of that. I think it's definitely the most memorable. I think on the Friends principle, the one where Sam steals Jesse's idol definitely works. I have this in green. Other options, Nina voting out her mom. Let's talk about how Sandra was there. And that was the blood versus water theme. I think Sam and Mark arguing at the merge speaks to kind of the winner journey
for sure.
and
That's
the
another
theme.
one.
That's what I was thinking of. Like,
What's
if
up?
you're looking for what represents the blood versus water theme the most, it probably would be Mark and Sam's proxy war at the merge of like, I don't want to get rid of Khan, but that they end up doing so. But I feel like there was even some stuff going on with the Jesse vote too, because Jesse was such a tight ally of Sam specifically.
Yeah. So Sam, I don't think did want to take out Jesse, but had to do it for Mark. So I think the theme is encompassed in that as well. KJ's advantage taking out Jordan was a big moment, but probably doesn't speak to actually the tone, where I could also say 3 players coming back from exile probably speaks more to how much we stagnated through the season.
I forgot about that they voted out 4 people and brought 3
I didn't
of them back.
I've never forgotten that. That was so boring.
And then just as a kind of lol one, the tribal with Juicy Dave saving himself. Juicy Dave,
Juicy Dave,
and Sandra's a big part of that. But
it was a very fun pre-merge actually, because you had also Chrissy just kind of being like such a wild card with someone who like self-admittedly had no idea what she was doing. Yet then you had everything also going on with like Shay finding the idol and then kind of publicly playing the idol, and one of her allies going home in Brianna. You have Sandra is now appearing as this survivor legend. Will they treat her as Russell? And the fact that like she was able to corral some really interesting votes and basically only gets voted out because she was kind of swap screwed in a way, going on day 17 as she usually does.
Day 16.
Or day 16. Even like the Croc vote was really interesting too, where you just have yet another hot mess vote. And here's a case where Croc was someone that seemed to be in a good place. And then like everything, even though he's reunited with his sister-in-law, everyone decides to turn on him in that moment. I think it's oftentimes the opposite of what we usually expect from champions versus contenders, as an example, where like I actually really liked the first chunk of the season, and there is a lot of
like Nina gets medevaced and it just goes off
a
cliff or a slide or something.
But I mean there is some emotional intrigue to the Jesse boot. I think before another Jesse was pulling off things, we were saying that's probably one of the most brutal moves in Survivor history. But then after that we have Exile Week, we have Jordy trying to sort of keep the entertainment aloft with his underdog story, though that eventually runs thin. And then you get this odd thing where like, okay, it looks like Mark is on track to win, but there's this whole mess at the final 5 where it's like a 2-2-1 and Chrissy, votes for Mark, but nobody else does. And so it all ends up just becoming this odd, messy thing where yes, Mark won as we predicted, but it wasn't exactly in a completely pleasing way that maybe it was from David.
That is true. The final 5 vote does define definitely Chrissy's loss into Mark's win, but I think that Sam is as big, if not a bigger part of that win. So I think it has to be a Sam moment. And I also think that it's also like, as well as being the biggest moment, it did really define the tenor of like, a season that was really intriguing. Like her taking the idol was like fascinating, like so intense. We spoke about it at length. But then like a lot of the stuff was like also kind of toxic. Like the conversation became so toxic around the definitely like a lot of the misogyny that I feel that Sam faced. And then even like a lot of like the stuff with her and Mark, when we like, I always felt like, wow, we're really having to get into the nitty gritty of this relationship. How like this is real life now. And like how intense that was.
Water.
Yeah, it wasn't like it wasn't really fun. I found it interesting. I don't know if I was having fun. And I think all of that kind of speaks to this.
Yeah, the psychological aspect of the blood versus water theme, I think, really came out there because the two of them were separated for the entire pre-merge. So they basically played 2 entirely separate games, and now they had to come together.
Whole US Survivor season.
Yeah, and basically had to play as one. I do think as well, it also informs the rest of the season because, like, not only does this make Jordy the underdog, right? He not because it's also the fun Cassandra story where he's like, no, you don't understand. Jesse had an idol, and Sam took it and voted him out. They're like, yeah, sure, Jordy, that's a crock, not the guy we voted out like a week ago. We don't believe you until, like, you know, Mark ends up playing the idol that Sam left behind for him at the final 6 or 5.
Yeah, I think this is definitive. And I also love how much Global Survivor is defined by stealing the idol and champions, stealing tribal council, where Nico's like,
Stealing
stop
the
it.
food.
So much. So I think that's pretty
Yeah,
definitive.
I walked into this and just had the same thoughts as you guys.
Yeah.
That was a funny moment for me. It was pretty easy. Again, not one of my favorite seasons, but still, you know, there's a lot to talk about. Whether I enjoyed talking about it, different story, but you know, not unlike what we're about to be talking about.
Yes, but I do think that the segue it's pretty defining. There's so many moments in Heroes versus Villains, one of the best seasons in Global Survivor history. We're about to talk about two of the best seasons in Global Survivor history.
Yeah.
But this is still so
hell
defining.
of a streak AU has going on right now. It balls in your court, Brains versus Brawn 2.
Yeah, well, two season straight. No, it's great. It is exceptional. And we'll talk about some other honorable mentions, but I don't think we're getting past a moment that the New York Times said was one of the best TV episodes of the year. As you pointed out earlier, Peridiam, it can't be viewed even in the US. George's episode 7 Tribal Council, I think, is globally defining.
Yeah,
I think the moment is him waving the idol around his head. I think that's the image that I have in my mind.
I was gonna say, like, how do you pick a moment? Because it was basically an entire half hour.
Man, it was long, but it was
just that tribal council.
I needed more. You could never give me too many donuts of that tribal council. We basically watched it in real time, and it was fantastic. But is that the moment of him like waving the idol, or is there anything else? Or
I mean, I'm just trying to think. Is it like him like kind of holding Simon by the balls and being like, I'm gonna
was he doing that? I remember that.
Well, he basically not with his words, by saying like, I'm going to do this thing. Either if you have an idol, play it on Jordy, or else he's gone, and then sort of turning the vote onto Frasier.
There's just the lead up with all these different stories, and incorporates almost everybody except for the one guy who gets voted out. He's like just the minion, but all these storylines with what was it, Jordy being there, spilling earlier in the episode where we see that he's got this secret alliance with George that comes into play. Then we have Simon, who's now on the bottom, but he wins immunity all of a sudden in this surprise immunity challenge, and now all of a sudden the plans from the people at the top are blown up, and they have to George on the fly creates this masterful stroke involving he's got Shawnee and Liz there as well, and they just it's the character development that leads up to episode 7 with this tribe and how it explodes, and it is so juicy, and it involves some of the biggest characters in some of the biggest characters in Australian Survivor, and it's just fantastic to watch it come together in this manner. I think this is like the best moment in Australian Survivor, one of the best moments, maybe even other than maybe like Parv and the double idol. I don't know what you compare this to.
I think it's tough just because there was like, this was a play, and I'll correct.
It was a play, but like it feels like a Game of Thrones plot coming together with so many different. It's what I want in a Survivor boot. And it's the purple. Yeah, right. Like this is what I want in a Survivor boot. But obviously, if everything was like this, I don't know how I'd feel. This would be just another.
You'd be vomiting.
Right, like I'd be crying, screaming, throwing up, everything.
Throwing up,
It'd just be ridiculous because this is, and it's like, of course, they edit it so that like the guy who goes is like the least interesting going forward. Oh yeah, and then what was his name again?
Frasier.
Stevie's
well, that's
there
the thing.
too.
I should correct myself. It wasn't Jordy as the one that was held hostage. Yeah, it was him being like, okay, I'm gonna do this, and Simon's like, whoa, you could get rid of Stevie. That should be fine. Stevie's like, what the hell?
Hey, man.
And it's one of the things that really brings Stevie over to George's side until he ends up sort of like, unfortunately, having to get cut short right before the merge.
Yeah, George is so defining. George's dynamic with Simon is so defining, and that's really these two big things. And then Jordy, Liz, and Shawnee are part of that. The Spice Girls Alliance, which is gonna, do so well until it doesn't. Liz is gonna win. I think that's all an important thing here. And we see that dynamic where they're like, "Wait, what are we doing?" And he's like, "Follow my lead." And they're like, "I'm scared on this roller coaster that you've driven me on." I think that all of that dynamic is very much there, and it's incredibly definitive. Just some other options because it's such a great season. The Shawnee blindside. Speaking about the Spice Girls, I think could be
that's a very distant second place, because again, this season runs through George, and it's interesting because I think you still look back on this being like, okay, was this the move that he should have made? But like him turning on his tightest ally, someone that he was with since the beginning, huge moment for him.
Yeah, I have in third place. Second place, I'd actually have. It's not
Is it
George,
the
but Simon finding the cookie idol.
yeah,
I don't know if
the
that's the
cookie
moment
narrative?
because the cookie narrative isn't a moment. That's what's hard is because like you could also have
It's
when
not,
like
no.
they play the cookie idol, not even with Simon
Oh,
there, and it
is it
doesn't
the
work.
scene where Simon tells Jordy about the location of his cookie idol?
Yeah, that it's in his butt. A lot of butt stuff here as well. So yeah, I think that's hard with the Cookie Idol because it's not as big as episode 7, and it's a
No.
huge storyline, but it doesn't have as much of a definitive moment. It goes on for so long, which is incredible. You could have on the mat after they play it and it doesn't work, where Simon's like, I have no idea what's going on, and George is like, yeah, that seems pretty clear. So many just weeks of the Cookie Idol, the fallout from the Cookie Idol. I would
Yeah.
have Simon just like holding it up and having found it, but I don't. That moment is lesser than the storyline, and even so, episode 7 is bigger. But I think the Cookie Idol is huge. Geordie going home after the failed 2 idol play with Liz.
Oh
It
boy.
speaks to a winner's loss. It's one of my favorite episodes of the season as well. It's also like, oh my god, they get so close and then it just fails. And then Geordie's such a big character in the season to go for that. I think is huge. And then I think I don't think God likes Paige.
I mean,
Speaks to
that's
George
a
and Jordy
great
dynamic.
yeah. That's probably one of the most like iconic lines, and probably one of the funniest lines in Australian Survivor
In Survivor
history.
history, probably.
What about like the
Say
Sam boot?
I would say the heroes
Yeah.
misplay with the idol. It's like you
Yeah,
had
I've got that too. It's another
two out of three shot of
almost,
making it,
you know,
and they screwed it. But of course, that's what the
It's
heroes.
tough because
So.
like the David
but it's the heroes
Zaharakis.
losing to George.
It's the heroes losing, which yeah, I don't think it defines the season, but it is.
It's a big moment.
You know,
No,
it's a
I mean
big
that
moment.
defines the post merge. Is like the heroes have this contingency going in, and the vigilantes are able to come together, which is like mostly villains plus Haley, and they're able to even on this moment. The villains are on the ropes, right? They have an idol. All they have to do is play it on the right person, and George is gone, and their national nightmare is over. But Sean Hampson decides, now that I have a real idol in my hands, I don't know if this is the right time to play it. And Sam goes home as a result, and it pretty much spells their doom for the rest of the season.
I mean, it's just so juicy. Like the drama is there's so there. And it's like this episode 16, we've been building up to this, and this is legitimately George in trouble. This isn't the edit, it's not anything else. This is legit. And it was 2 idols played, and they missed it, they whiffed.
And they have, and then also that's a big part of like Haley giving the information and her kind of trying to take some agency there. So she's a part of that as well. I think that the kind of the tenor of the structure of that post merge is captured there. I think you could also say the vigilantes winning in that merge vote when everything comes together. And like look at the characters like Simon, George, Haley, Liz, and Shotty. Like there's so much going on.
Also, the Stevie boot. Stevie boot's great. It's a great moment.
That's an interesting Spice Girls.
I wouldn't say it's like the defining moment, but man, does it just continue that just really deep the dynamic with the Spice Girls alliance, just crushing it.
See, that's the reason why. Another reason, going back to the original point here, why episode 7 is the moment, because this was also the first time that we had gotten nearly half and half. It was like 11 versus 13, but returnees versus newbies, and mix them in. And what better representation is there of Australian Survivor heroes versus villains than an episode, a tribal council, where it is all these big characters. The vast majority of them are returnees, and the person that goes is a nobody newbie, which, to be candid, with probably the exception of Liz and some Jerry moments, is a good representation of that half of a cast.
Hey, justice for Matt. Yeah, no, it definitely does sum up the casting style. So yeah, I like we had it at the beginning of this, but I'm glad we talked through some other incredible moments of an incredible season, and that segues to, I'm sure, incredible moments of an incredible. What do we do for here? Are we doing him flipping of him?
I think we'll just put it. Yeah, I mean, I would try to be generous and have it be like just like
that whole tribal council.
I mean, I just wrote Fraser boot. Just the Fraser boot in and of itself. Just that tribal council. It's like a half hour of just pure juicy George v. Simon drama. That's what
juicy.
it is.
It's not Juicy Dave.
So juicy.
But
no,
also,
Juicy Dave. No.
Yeah, was I saying Juicy David? Didn't feel right. What did I say? No, I said Juicy Dave. Okay, right.
Okay. Juicy Dave. No.
Okay.
You know the nickname.
I'm like, all right, because in Wikipedia they're like David. I was literally like, who? And then realized.
Please, Juicy David is my father.
Yeah. So he was the father of Brianna. That's Blood versus Water. Titus versus Rebels. I have it in yellow. I think there's a lot of options here. I do have one.
Yeah, I have a lot of options too. I'm
Throw
like,
them out to me,
question
Peridiam.
mark?
Such a good season. It's
Oh, well, I
such
mean,
a
like,
good
let's
season.
start at the top with like Ferris just somehow winning this whole thing after being
Ferris's
one of the
win,
main
fair
characters.
enough.
Ferris's
Yeah.
win really does cap off. He's like, it's like kind of like a George wins Heroes Villains almost a little bit, maybe a little bit less in
A little
that
bit.
George was such a dynamic force. But for me, that was like one of the things I considered. There's the Valeria boot. That was another big moment for me with
Raven's
the,
advantage.
but it's more advantage based. But I still thought that was a wild moment that I'm like, and of course Ferris is one of the
It's
only two people
memorable.
in on it, and it
Mm.
involves him, who's again. But I'm like, maybe it's the involving Ferris and Kirby coming together in the post merge. They're the two biggest characters of the season. It's got, in fact, it's like the Haley and George of it all.
Yeah,
right?
it really has to run through them, in my opinion. I was of a
Yeah.
mind to say at one point, like, the Kirby boot. It was not given
I
nearly
was
as much
thinking Kirby
ceremony
boot.
as the
Right.
Luke
Not
one, but
playing the idol on Kirby. Ferris not playing it.
yeah, because I would also
Yeah.
say that almost like Luke in Champions versus Contenders too, the big narrative towards the end of the season was like Kirby had done this incredible job. Her Riz was unmatched of like her being able to draw people in. Why is nobody going after Kirby? Finally, people start doing so, and now she's like, oh yeah, I am a former AFL player, so let me just start winning immunity challenges. And so this was finally a moment where like she was her most cornered, and it really did feel like the swan song for maybe the player of the season.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sum up all of this in a moment that I think it is as the only moment that I have in my top column, but I'm interested in talking about some others. But I think it's so unfortunate for me personally, but I think it is the final 12.
Is it the Eden boot?
Yeah, the Eden boot,
That's
where
that was
Jaden's
another
going to
one I
turn
wrote.
on Eden. I do think that moment is like the memorable moment of the season. This one's for Winner Lad is incredibly memorable. It's a huge TV moment.
Yeah.
Again, unfortunate for me personally how it played out, but I loved it then and loved it now just as a TV moment. I think it's huge. I literally gasped. Like, how many moments can make your jaw drop? It was so unforeseeable to me. Eden's a huge character who's going to go, so you get a lot of like the middle-aged mafia and him going in that, but then you also get two really important things here. You get in all of these shifting votes, I think three may be really important things. In all these shifting votes, you get the Titans versus Rebels. So you got the theme right there. They actually go back to their tribal lines. How, I still don't know.
For for a second.
For a second. Then they go to even numbers as well, which was such a big part of the post-merge where I was like, they just go into different configurations that are usually equal. Why? So that was a big part. And then you also, importantly, and I wouldn't put it in if it didn't have this, but you have Kirby and Ferris just linking up after beefing for so long. It's like, oh no, but now we're rebels. Okay, the only person who messes with rebels is us, and they are communicating and they get it done and they win on that. And that to me is defining.
And I think on the other side, and again, very emblematic of the season, you have similarly Mark and Caroline, who were tight allies in the middle-aged mafia, but were feuding for basically the entire swap when Viola ends up getting voted out. And then they finally come together here. They go on that reward and try to make amends and decide to vote together tight and strong. And as is the way Mother Nature intended in the end, the rebel beats the Titan.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many moments here which you mentioned, which we could talk about. Like the Viola vote as an example, even the crazy Sarah vote of like Mark versus the middle-aged mafia. But a lot of this
and then Sarah votes incorrectly and basically votes herself out of the game.
and that speaks to, I think, a lot of the chaos of I mean, you couldn't do it without Ferris and Kirby there, but I think it does speak to a lot of the chaos and the big characters of Mark and Caroline, as we're talking about, of the season. But I think that this final 12 vote speaks to a lot of these moments that come together here, as we're saying, with like them all going into battle, into war together after all of this. You could have a lot of like the Ferris and Kirby stuff that all comes together here at the final 12. And then it speaks to what will happen with Ferris and Kirby kind of going forward on and off in different ways and Ferris winning. I think that is really important. So I think that does sum a lot of it up. But I will say as well, I also had, as you said, like the Raymond advantage. I don't know that that's defining, but it's big and memorable.
It's a big moment. I mean, it's like the Charles thing where it's like,
I mean,
it's not a big, yeah. I was gonna say it's like the Charles. It reminds me of the Charles thing in the pre-merge where it's like, what is? And I also didn't really love it because it was a twist, but it's wild. It's a memorable moment.
I would say though the Charles moment has more legs to it than the Raymond one, because the Charles one, remember, yes, it's a bullshit twist of like, oh, the only 3 people can vote, but like this is Ferris being able to take advantage of being in the minority, where it's him and Eileen and Kirby who are voting, and he says like, okay, I'm gonna basically force Winna to flush his idol, and then we get rid of Charles. I think this was, Ferris had done some stuff previously, but this had felt like one of the first times where like he truly was somebody that was kind of taking the game by the horns, especially from an underdog position. The Raymond one sort of felt like in the episode 7 Heroes versus Villains, like it felt like theater in the best way. Like, and it's almost like that was a big spectacle moment, but really that entire episode of like Raymond playing up how much he wanted to go home. And look, there are still some questionable tactics as to, especially after seeing what happened to Scott, if you would want to do that, but just the pure glee over everyone's faces. And even Valeria after the fact being like, listen,
hey, good sport.
I can't really push against this too much of oh my God, this guy ended up purposely drawing all the votes to him to get rid of me with one vote.
I will say, I don't think the Raymond vote, I think it's like actually the opposite of defining, because it's so Raymond based when if anything, Raymond was very under-edited.
It's a little side
and it's also,
quest.
yeah, it's like, and it's also
Raymond
like
side
kind of like
quest.
a strange way for Valeria to go after all the stuff with like Caroline and stuff. Like it all comes down to this advantage, which has nothing to do with most of the people she's been like kind of engaging with in the season. So it's a big moment. I think it's like not defining. I think that the Charles vote at the episode 10 is defining from like a Ferris perspective, in Kirby saving herself, and like that battle is quite defining. I don't think it's defining from a production perspective, because it was such a big twist in what we otherwise said was like not a huge like production season that was actually otherwise very chill.
Yeah, except for the Raymond thing, it was an incredibly clean post-merge.
Yeah, so I think that we don't look at production as having been like the way that the Baden vote was indicative of the extremity of the Brains versus Brawn production. This is not that. So I don't think it's defining. And for me, like that episode really annoyed me. But I know a lot of people loved it, but to me, that's like not the tenor of the season. I loved so much of it. I didn't love that. A lot of people did, and I think would very positively ascribe episode 10 as a defining moment, like, oh my God, big Ferris win. Like, and I get that. It wasn't that for me. And I still do think the final 12 encompasses way, way more of this like really hectic post-merge with so many big characters who are all involved in this big tie.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like David Goliath in the US with the Dan Rangering Idol Play Wars versus we talked about this in the previous podcast, which was the minority vote split, where I thought that emblematic of the season defined the season a lot more. This is the same thing. Crazy moment, huge moment, big moment. You're gonna remember it, but also like that's not. It feels like a random one-off side plot that happens for an episode with Raymond and Ferris's wacky adventure, and then we get back to the dynamics that this season really. And unfortunately, we lose Valerio. I thought was a very compelling character on the show, but oh well. Yeah. I agree with you, by the way. I don't know if we're gonna
as a TV show.
It would be kind of yeah. I wish Raymond had more of a presence in the post merge. That's the one thing I would say about this that I didn't love. I love the season. Might be my favorite Australian, but
I still think it's mine. Yeah, it's wild that it only aired earlier this year. This year has felt like so long, but God, what a way to start the year. I will also say,
sorry, go.
No, I was gonna say I also it's definitely not a moment, but like just what a great slice of that first week when it was Frankie, Jess, and PETA all going in that. You say this all the time, Shannon, but the wildness of the fact that the Titans and the Rebels both had the exact same narrative in the first tribal council, even though I think the PETA vote had an idol involved as well. But like, okay, there was the cool athletic people and how everyone else basically came together to dethrone them at the first tribal council and blindside them. Like, God, that was such a brilliant appetizer to the entire 7-meal course we got over the course of the next.
And that defined the whole season.
Well, it did, to be fair. Like that
I was
first
say,
week defined how that first episode, I was like, oh, we're on now as well. And I think that, like, to be fair, having done the deep dives, I think that the I was going to say Champions, and I kept doing this in the season. The Titans was more edit manufactured, where they didn't see it as much like we're cool kids, like we're toppling the cool kids. Even though that is like the structure that we got, but it was more kind of involved than that. Whereas when you talk to the Rebels, they're like, yeah, no, we toppled the cool kids. I did have here like even like Kirby going against the Cuddlers, but then the decoy votes. I mean, they were speaking about those decoy votes for a very long time. So it definitely was defining from a gameplay perspective, from a story perspective as well. Like Ferris involved with that, Kelly involved in
just everything Kelly.
Early,
I know,
I'm
it's
a
like
therapist
Kelly's
is memorable.
Huge character, goes for half the season. There's so much to talk about with her.
Kelly's boot, where she gets up and like admits what her job is, and nobody reacts to it.
That's a big moment. That's not, I don't think, defining, but it like Kelly is somewhat defining, so maybe it is. But yeah, I think a lot of like with PETA going home in the first Rebel tribal council with an idol in what was shown as like a very mirror image structure to the Titans, with Kirby involved in that, with Ferris involved in that, with Kelly and everything. I do think is a big moment. And in other seasons, probably might be the defining moment, even in the first week. But there's so much here. Do we agree that the final 12 does somehow sum up all of these moving parts in a way that's actually quite impressive, considering how much?
I think so. I think if you are somehow trying to slice this incredible labyrinthian dessert that is Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels, I think you found the rare slice that does represent, from a thematic perspective, a strategic perspective, a moment that highlights arguably the two main characters and one of the best dynamics that I have seen recently in a Survivor, with just how juicily complicated it is. I think you kind of found the perfect match. And it's wild because, yeah, it's just shows up. It's the vote right before the jury starts. But in that moment, it is such a snapshot as to everything Titans versus Rebels was up to that point and everything it would be for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that was when I looked at it and I wrote down a bunch of different options. Eden Boot was the first thing I wrote, and so you brought it up.
And,
so even though I rolled through it last, you said it, you brought it up, Shannon, you defended it well. I'm like, yeah, I just nodded my head in agreement. Like, this is what I think stood out to me the most in a season full of standout moments.
And also the chaos as well of, like, sort of like what we talked about with the Raymond moment. Jaden, one of the most like purple guys that sort of is looked at as, oh yeah, he's not really there to play, like swapping his vote to get rid of Eden and prevent a rock draw as well. That is sort of, again, emblematic of some of these random players kind of like coming into focus that we never would have expected.
It's actually such incredible and beautiful storytelling that there was so much going on, so many different storylines to be invested in, and they all came to the point where it just was like right there, and like two battering rams, like two armies against each other, again, for the briefest of moments. And then for Eden, who's such a big character, to go on that, I think he would appreciate what an iconic moment that is in Survivor history. And I think that thumbs up. We did so well with this. It's so satisfying. And what I really love
is a lot. This is a 2.5 hour like
yes, I know. And I didn't have somewhere I had to be 45 minutes ago. It's so fine. I love that it was like such a love letter to International Survivor, except for some of the seasons that we compared to.
A bag of chocolate, there's something to it.
It's a very good hit rate. I would say that there are like 3, maybe 4 out of the 16 or 17 we covered, that are like actually genuine duds. The other ones, again, but even like Australian Survivor, like, again, Blood versus Water, I really don't like the season, but I think there's at least
there's
good,
there.
like,
there's stuff
9 episodes.
There's stuff in 2016. This is what's good about talking about the defining moments. I think other than New Zealand season 1, we are like, okay, well, there's still like some great stuff. Like what David did in All Stars, even though I really don't like that season, in that Daisy boot. That Daisy boot is phenomenal. There's so much there. So it's nice.
It's the only season in the history, all of the Survivor seasons out there. New Zealand season 1, unfortunately, is the one season I would not recommend checking out. It's just not worth your time. It takes too much. It's just a waste of your time. Unfortunately, I feel bad, but whatever. People, you can DM me if you want.
No, I don't think. There's there one.
I don't think anyone's gonna come for me. I've said this before. So it's like, it's just not a good show. And but everything else, oh my gosh, Australian Survivor, even when it's low, it's still decent. It's okay. You can fast forward a little. I know it's pretty rough. It does get, but like the highs, they are reaching, if not surpassing, the highs that you might be familiar with if you watch US Survivor. And there's so much when it's good, you just have a buffet of just so much to say, and it just feels epic. I mean, they do a great job with the cinematography, never mind. It's just the drama and the politics and the gaming and the characters, when they really invest in the time that you get with the Australian cast. It's so good. And to cap it off, I mean, I don't know what we're going to get next with Brains versus Brawn 2. It's going to be really hard to follow up with these. I mean, I'm crossing my fingers because I walked into this season, Titans Rebels, like probably not going to pick up like where we left off with Heroes Villains. But hey, I'll take whatever, as long as it's not like the bottom of the barrel. And I'm like, oh no, wait, this might be my favorite.
It was impossible.
I need some time to think on it, but it's so good. Anyway,
just if you're looking into it. Yeah, like, but before Titans versus Rebel, I remember George said, I heard it was better than Heroes Villains. And I was like, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Not possible. Because that's like, I'm like, that would be the 2 best seasons back to back in global Survivor history. And then by the end, I'm like, this is the 2 best seasons back to back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see if it makes it a 3P. But regardless, I think there's going to be like, Australian Survivor especially is on such a tear. And even though, we're finishing by talking about it. Again, global Survivor in general, I'm sure I am preaching to the choir at this point, but there not only is Survivor that exists outside of the United States, but you should check it out. Especially, again, if you feel there are certain parts of, especially from a production perspective, Survivor nowadays, and you're like, I want, the old Survivor that I grew up with back from a structural perspective. I mean, you're not necessarily getting that part and parcel with Australian Survivor, but if you're looking for bigger casts, 2 tribes, more episodes, epic challenges, etc.
Physical
I mean,
challenges.
yeah, I mean, this debate comes up quite literally every year when Australian Survivor is airing. You compare the two, and I don't necessarily prefer one to the other. I am just so happy that there is, especially at this moment, so much great global Survivor that is happening, and hopefully that gets represented in an upcoming global season of Survivor, quite literally. But it's also been a great walk down memory lane as well, Shannon, getting to talk through like all these different countries too, and going back to a decade and moving forward from there to 2024.
Yeah, like when they rushed Daisy out of her All-Star boot into her 2019 exit press for what? Like, for why? No, this has been really, really fun. I do think we like comically dunked on Survivor New Zealand season 1 to the point where like
I was kind of looking forward to doing that, to be honest.
Yeah, like if there was a human, it'd be rolling in its grave. If you are the one Survivor New Zealand season 1 defender, please let us know. If there's someone out there in this world, please let us know. Otherwise, I think people probably are on the same page. And but beside that season, I really did enjoy walking down memory lane, as you said, and like talking about global Survivor, because it's been a bit of a long off season. We've talked a lot of US Survivor.
Yeah.
I've really missed talking about like all the great international seasons. I want to do a bit more of this content where we can, Summer of Survivor style, as I go into my own summer and do some like fun off season international stuff, so we can just like keep the ball rolling, keep momentum high on global Survivor as we go into what will be probably a really big year of Australian Survivor, and hopefully more. So yeah, I just want to do that. And this was so fun, and I'm glad we did it. And it's so satisfying that I really think we solved Survivor discourse here and got these seasons.
There we go.
Thank you both so much for being here. And it was really a good time. Peridiam, tell the people what they can find from you. Why you should watch the Survivor South Africa video coming soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet. I still need to watch. I kind of want to watch the first 5.
Do it. I've only watched 4 and 5.
I guess not. Maybe not the first 4, but that's the thing. I've sort of been like hung up on
Watch
that.
5.
But I guess I don't know for sure like how 5 fits, because I feel like 6 onward they basically are filmed consecutively, that it feels like they make sense, but 5 is a little bit divorced from that.
I believe it's a different showrunner as well.
Yeah, that's how it is.
Well, LaRue rebooted it from season 6. So is a reboot. But to be fair, LaRue was in the production team for season 5. And the fact that season 5, I know with Tajan was season 4, but the fact that season 5 is so heavily included in the returning season, and obviously they all do so well. Like, I do think like it's part of just like the lore now because of that. So I think it's fair.
With season 9, I'm like, okay, you got to watch Champions at this point. It just doesn't make sense if you don't. You will miss out on the context. Didn't know who these people were that well. Figured it out, but
and you also, if you talk about from the UK, like are there cultural touchstones? We found out a lot about South African sports. Found a lot about the
but South African sports from 2014.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, which is something I'm sure you want to know.
So use that at your garden parties.
Good Jeopardy trivia right there. Anyway, I'm currently in the throes of Big Brother, even though we're talking Survivor here. I'll be getting into Survivor really soon because we're not too far removed from the next season, which you can expect a new video every Wednesday as per usual. I've got them all lined out already. Just sitting down, waiting to be edited. But right now I am really in the throes of Big Brother 26, and what's going down with that season. And I'm chronicling every single winner in Big Brother history and their winning game. And I have written my 2 longest videos on my channel in the last 7 years with this series. Incredibly long. I think I've calculated I wrote like 75,000 words amongst the entire series. It's so much. And I'm sitting down currently editing how Casey Clark won Big Brother 20. And then I get to go to Jackson, and then I go to the others. It's just a lot. It's a lot of stuff. My brain is
really enjoying it.
I'm not, honestly, I'm legitimately not enjoying it, but it was fun writing it at the beginning. I'm like, oh, here's the original winners and the classics.
Right.
And then I started getting to the more modern ones, and I knew so much that I'm like, I have to include this, I have to include that. And then by the end of it, I'm like,
I like this podcast.
This video is so long. I mean, I'm like, this is such a long video. All of them are like an hour, and my regular videos are like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm like, here I am editing Derek Levasseur, and it's like 30-minute long. And I'm like, this is like 2 videos about one guy that I'm like kind of whatever on. and I have to. I'm doing it because I'm just sticking to it. I'm like, I said I'm going to do it, but I'm like, my God, I'm like, I got to sit down and get through it because Survivor starts, soon. So it's a lot. Ultimately, I'm glad that I'm doing it because it's just like chronicling the winners. It's fresh in my mind. It's refreshing me. It's cool. But that's really what I'm doing right now. It's really taking up the bulk of my time. So I'm just going to be doing that for the rest of the week. That's what I'm up to. That is what I'm doing.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Mike, you've got a lot on King of the Preseason and all the seasons.
Yeah, there we go. I mean, as Peridiam is mentioning, Survivor is coming. I mean, I'm happy that I got to pull my mind briefly out of Survivor US to talk about international Survivor, but then I'm dipping my head right back in Last Gasp style. If you have missed it, I have everything you might need about Survivor 47 in the preseason. I got the chance to talk with all 18 contestants. As a bit of a tease, one of them shouted out Peridiam.
Yeah, just before I was doing this podcast, as I was getting ready for it, listening to Mike, talk to Andy, and then you mentioned Peridiam. I'm like, yeah, so those are the people I'm about to talk to.
Part of their prep. So it's not just Big Brother players that are using you, Peridiam, as part of the curriculum. But I had the chance to talk with them. That's up in written, audio, and video form, both on Parade, and Rob has a podcast. Of course, I'll be doing Exit Press every week, as well as doing the B&B with Liana. I'm also covering Big Brother, doing Exit Press there, as we've started the jury phase for season 26, which has also just been such a fun season so far as well. I think some of the highs we were talking about a season like Titans versus Rebels, or maybe more so like a Philippines or even a Brains versus Brawn, where it's like maybe the level of gameplay isn't optimal, but there is so much happening at all times with these delectable characters. So check it out. I'm also covering The Challenge. I do scripted TV with Lost and TV for Real with Sasha Joseph. You can follow everything I'm doing at a Mike Bloom Typer. I'm also on Cameo. If you want to throw me some money and have me talk some more about International Survivor, I am more than happy to keep flapping those gums for green.
Well, hopefully we got to all the moments. If we missed any, let us know. But this has been such a fun time. I'll be covering 47 as well at Survivor Global. Week 1 guest is the aforementioned Caroline Cordes, who will be joining me to talk about the premiere. Also doing the RHAP draft next week, getting into Mike's preseason content so that I can continue my fabulous run of never winning. Not that it's not Mike's
I was like,
fault.
did you win 46?
You really are the Sharn of the draft.
Rob's not even in the draft. So I'm the who?
The Sharn of the draft.
Oh, the Sharn. I'm like, which one? We haven't survived New Zealand season 1 of the draft. I'm Sean Russell. No. I'm Sari. Okay, I'm Sari of the draft. Let's make it far. It's the Shawnee. We can be.
Oh, I like that.
About people who lose but are good. George, maybe. Okay. So I don't know what I'm saying anymore. This has been really fun. The draft. I'm on Survivor now doing Spark or Snuff this week as well for some 47 preseason content. Yeah, it's all happening, and this was so fun. Thank you guys so much. It's such a good time. I hope people enjoyed it. I hope people enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'm in the throes of Big Brother, and then all of a sudden I'm spending like 20 minutes watching like arguments with chappies. I'm just like, whatever. This is great.
I mean, I would say that argument is probably one of the most Big Brother moments from International Survivor.
It is. When we brought it up, I was like, this feels like Big Brother all of a sudden.
I also was like deep in my very badly categorized notes, like, Graham swore on what at the Final Four? Like, just trying to remember exactly what happened. His mother. Yes, that's what my notes told me. It took me a while to find them, but now I remember. So this was great. Great walk down memory lane, solve Survivor discourse, and it's so much fun with both of you. Thank you both so much. Thank you to everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.